and yet something inside you does not follow. Your eyes close, your muscles soften, your breathing slows. But when morning comes, the feeling is not renewal, only a quiet weight that has no clear cause. It is a strange contradiction. A body that appears to sleep, but does not seem to recover. This is not a failure in a single night, but perhaps a trace of something older, something your body has not fully adjusted to. Why does your body feel tired even after a full night of sleep? There is a familiar moment that arrives quietly, often without warning, when the body wakes but does not feel as though it has returned from anywhere. The eyes open, the room becomes visible again, and yet something remains unchanged, as if the night passed across the surface without touching what was meant to be restored. This is not the sharp exhaustion of too little sleep, but a softer, more confusing state, where the body feels present and absent at the same time. It is a kind of tiredness that
Little
does not
sleep,
fully explain
but a
itself.
softer, more
It does not
confusing
match the
state,
expectation
where the
that
body
rest
feels
should bring a
present
clear
and
sense
absent
of
at the same
renewal.
time.
Instead,
It is a
it
kind of
lingers,
tiredness,
without
little
urgency,
sleep,
fully
but
explained,
a
without
softer,
resolution.
more
The
confusing
body appears
state,
to have done
where
what
the
it was
body
supposed
feels
to do,
present and
yet
absent
still,
at the same
the
time.
result feels
Instead,
incomplete.
it is a kind of
When this
tiredness,
happens,
little sleep,
it often
but
feels
a softer,
personal.
more
It is
confusing
something
state,
inside
where the
that
body
is
feels
corrected.
present and
The
absent at the
feeling
same
itself is
time.
not new.
Instead, it is a
It may
kind
not
of
belong only
tiredness,
to the
little
present
sleep,
moment. It often
but
feels
a
as if you
softer,
step
more
back from the
confusing
room
state,
into the
where the body feels
quiet
present and absent
structure
at
of
the
the
same
modern
time.
life.
Instead,
The
it is a
experience
kind of
begins to
tiredness,
feel,
little
for
sleep,
most of
but
human
a softer,
existence,
more
the
confusing
act of
state,
sleeping did not
where the
take
body
place
feels
in a controlled
present and
environment,
absent at the
and
same
it did not
time.
follow a
Instead,
single
it is a kind of
uninterrupted
tiredness,
expected
little
time.
sleep,
The ground was
but a
uneven,
softer,
the
more
air
confusing
moved with
state,
temperature and
where the
sound,
body feels
and the
present
body
and
remained
absent
part
at the
of a
same
wider
time.
environment
Instead,
that could
it
never
is a
fully
kind of
stop.
tiredness, little sleep,
In that
but
sentence, was not a complete separation from the world, but a lighter state that allowed the body to remain connected, even while resting. The expectation that sleep should feel like a full reset may come from a more recent condition, one where the night has been simplified into something stable and contained. In contrast, the human body developed within conditions that were variable, where rest was shaped by changes in light, by subtle sounds, by the presence of others, and by the need to remain partially aware. This does not mean that sleep was shallow or ineffective, but it suggests that rest and awareness were not entirely separate processes. The feeling of waking without renewal may reflect a difference between what the body is doing and what we expect it to feel like. The body can complete cycles of sleep, move through stages that are widely understood, and still leave behind a sense that something is not fully settled. This difference between process and perception is where the confusion begins. It raises a quiet possibility that the feeling of being restored is not only the result of biological activity during the night, but also of how closely the conditions of that night align with what the body was shaped to experience over long periods of time. When those conditions change, even slightly, the outcome may change in ways that are difficult to notice directly. The modern environment offers stability, consistency, and comfort, but these qualities may also remove certain signals that the body once used to organize its rest. Without those signals, the body may still sleep, but the experience of waking can feel less complete, as though part of the process is missing or delayed. This does not point to a failure, but to a difference, one that has developed slowly as the conditions of human life have shifted. The feeling itself becomes a trace, a small indication that the body and its environment are not perfectly aligned. It does not explain itself clearly, and it does not resolve easily, but it remains consistent enough to be noticed. The question is not only why the body feels tired after a full night of sleep, but whether the idea of a full night, as it exists now, matches what the body recognizes as complete rest, or whether something within that definition has changed in ways that are not immediately visible. The feeling does not begin in the morning. It is already present, quietly forming during the night, long before the eyes open. While the body lies still, something continues beneath that stillness, not in a way that is broken, but in a way that is not fully resolved. Sleep appears to happen, yet the sense of completion does not fully arrive. This creates a subtle separation between what is happening in the body and what is felt afterward. The body follows its rhythms, but the experience of those rhythms does not always match what we expect them to produce. A Over time, this difference becomes familiar enough that it is often accepted without question, even though it remains difficult to explain. When we look more closely, the idea of a full night of sleep begins to reveal itself as something defined by structure rather than by sensation. A certain number of hours, a continuous stretch, a quiet environment, these elements shape what is considered complete. Yet the body does not measure time in the same way. It responds to changes, to signals, to patterns that extend beyond the simple passage of hours. In earlier conditions of human life, rest was not measured by duration alone, and it was not confined to a single uninterrupted period. The night was often divided, influenced by shifts in temperature, by sounds, by the movement of others nearby. These interruptions were not necessarily disruptions. They were part of a broader pattern in which rest and awareness existed together, not as opposites, but as overlapping states. This does not suggest that people in those conditions were more rested in a simple sense, but it does suggest that the body became accustomed to a form of sleep that included variation. The expectation that sleep should be continuous and deeply separated from the environment may not fully reflect that older pattern. When the modern environment removes variation, replacing it with uniform conditions, the body continues to follow its internal rhythms, but without the external signals that once helped shape them. This creates a situation where sleep can occur, yet the feeling of restoration may not fully align with it. The body completes its processes, but the absence of familiar cues may leave those processes feeling incomplete. This is not a failure of sleep itself, but a difference in how sleep is experienced. The sensation of tiredness after rest may arise from this gap, where the body has done what it can within the conditions provided, but those conditions do not fully match what it has adapted to over long periods of time. If we return to the moment of waking, the quiet wait that remains begins to take on a different meaning. It is not only a sign of insufficient rest, but possibly a sign of misalignment, a small indication that the environment in which the body is resting does not entirely correspond to the patterns it recognizes. The feeling does not point clearly to its cause, but it persists, repeating across nights that appear complete on the surface. In this way, the experience becomes less about a single night and more about a broader relationship between the body and the conditions in which it rests. The question shifts slightly, becoming less about how long the body sleeps and more about how closely the structure of that sleep reflects the deeper patterns that shaped it over time. The difference becomes easier to notice when nothing appears to be wrong. There are nights when the room is quiet, the body is still, and the expected conditions of rest are all in place. Yet the outcome feels uncertain. No clear disturbance can be identified, and still, the sense of completion does not arrive. This absence of a visible cause creates a particular kind of confusion, because the body seems to have followed every step that should lead to recovery. It is in this quiet mismatch that the experience begins to feel less like a single problem, and more like a pattern that does not fully align with its setting. If the body was simply deprived of sleep, the explanation would be direct, and the feeling would match the cause. But here, the cause is not obvious, and the feeling is not sharp. It is steady, almost neutral, but persistent enough to be noticed. It lingers at the edges of attention, especially in the first moments after waking, when the mind is still quiet enough to sense it clearly. As the day continues, it may fade into the background, but it does not fully disappear, and by the next morning, it often returns in the same form. When we shift attention away from the immediate night and consider the longer arc of human experience, this pattern begins to take on a different shape. For most of that arc, rest was not isolated from the world. The ground carried uneven pressure, the air shifted in temperature, and the presence of others created a shared rhythm that moved through the night. Sleep was not a sealed state. It existed within a flow of subtle changes, where the body remained connected to its surroundings even while it recovered. In that context, the feeling of waking may not have depended on a complete separation from the environment, but on a balance between rest and responsiveness. The body did not need to fully withdraw in order to restore itself. It needed to remain within a system of signals that continued quietly through the night. When those signals change or become simplified, the body does not immediately lose its ability to sleep, but it may lose some of the structure that once guided how rest was experienced. The modern environment reduces variation. It offers stillness, control, controlled temperature and a level of isolation that would have been rare in earlier conditions. These changes create a form of rest that is consistent, but also detached from many of the subtle cues that once shaped it. The body continues to move through its internal patterns, but without the same external framework. This does not stop sleep from happening, but it may alter how the result is felt upon waking. The quiet tiredness that remains can be understood as a trace of that alteration. It's not a clear signal of something missing, but a suggestion that the relationship between the body and its environment has shifted in ways that are not immediately visible. The feeling itself does not demand attention, and it does not escalate. It simply remains, creating a sense that rest has occurred, but is not fully translated into the experience of renewal. Over time, this becomes familiar, and it is often interpreted as a normal part of modern life. Yet its consistency suggests that it may reflect something deeper, a subtle misalignment that has developed gradually as the conditions of human rest have changed. The question, then, is not only about the effectiveness of sleep, but about the definition of rest itself, and whether the conditions that now define a full night are the same conditions that the body recognizes as complete, or whether the body is still waiting for signals that no longer arrive in the environments we have built around it, leaving behind a quiet sense of incompleteness that carries from one morning into the next without ever fully resolving. There is a quiet assumption that once sleep begins, the body moves smoothly toward restoration, as if the process follows a clear path from fatigue to renewal. The idea feels simple and reassuring, that sleep is a kind of reset, a state in which the body temporarily steps away from the demands of the day and returns restored by morning. Yet the experience described earlier suggests something more complicated, where sleep can occur without producing that expected sense of recovery. This raises a subtle but important distinction, one that separates the act of sleeping from the outcome of feeling restored. The body can enter sleep, move through its stages, and still leave behind a feeling that something has not fully completed. When we look at sleep from a biological perspective, it is often described as a sequence of repeating cycles, each containing different phases that contribute to various forms of restoration. These cycles continue through the night, whether or not we are aware of them, and they represent a pattern that has been widely observed and studied. The body does not remain in a single state during sleep, but shifts between lighter and deeper stages, each with its own role. On the surface, this suggests a structured and reliable process. However, the presence of structure does not guarantee that the experience of waking will feel complete. The body may complete these cycles, and yet the result may still feel partial. This difference between internal process and external experience is where the question begins to deepen. If the body is doing what it is meant to do, why does the feeling of restoration sometimes fail to appear? To approach this, it becomes useful to consider that sleep is not only an internal biological process, but also a state shaped by the environment in which it occurs. The body does not operate in isolation. It responds continuously to signals, even during rest, and those signals influence how its internal rhythms unfold. In earlier periods of human history, the environment provided a wide range of subtle inputs throughout the night. Changes in light were gradual. Temperature shifted naturally, and sounds from the surrounding landscape created a low level of ongoing awareness. The body was not fully disconnected from these signals, even while sleeping. Instead, it existed within them, adjusting continuously in small ways that did not prevent rest, but may have shaped how rest was experienced. This suggests that sleep, as it developed over long periods of time, was not designed to occur in a completely stable or isolated setting. Rather, it may have relied on a balance between internal cycles and external cues. In contrast, the modern sleeping environment tends to reduce or remove many of these cues. Artificial lighting creates a clear separation between day and night, but may not follow natural patterns. Temperature is held constant, and sound is often minimized or eliminated entirely. The result is a form of sleep that is highly controlled, but also simplified. The body continues to perform its internal processes, but it does so in an environment that provides fewer signals to guide those processes. This does not necessarily disrupt sleep in an obvious way, but it may influence how effectively the body transitions through its stages. or how those stages are experienced upon waking. The feeling of incomplete rest may emerge from this quiet difference, where the internal structure of sleep remains intact, but the external conditions that once supported it have changed. If this is the case, then the experience of tiredness after a full night of sleep is not simply a failure of the body, but a reflection of a more complex relationship between the body and its surroundings. The body continues to follow patterns shaped over long periods of human history, while the environment in which it rests has shifted more rapidly. This creates a space where the two are not fully aligned, and within that space, the sense of incomplete restoration can appear, not as a clear problem, but as a subtle indication that something within the process is no longer fully supported by the conditions in which it takes place. One reason this distinction is easy to miss is that modern life tends to treat sleep as a quantity before it treats it as a condition. A night is counted, measured, and compared against a schedule. If the number appears sufficient, then the body is expected to feel restored. When that does not happen, the experience can seem irrational, as though the body has failed to respond to something clear and straightforward. Yet the body has never lived by duration alone. Across the long beginning of human life, rest took shape inside moving conditions rather than inside fixed plans. Night arrived gradually, not at the press of a switch. Darkness deepened in stages. Air cooled over time. Groups settled together, and the body adjusted not only to its own fatigue, but to the shifting world around it. In that older setting, the body did not simply enter sleep as though crossing a clean border. It drifted into it through signals. It remained within those signals while asleep. It came back out of sleep through them as well. This matters because restoration may depend not only on what the body does during sleep, but on how sleep is entered, sustained, and left behind. The body can lose consciousness, remain asleep for many hours, and still move through the night in a way that feels incomplete by morning if the surrounding conditions do not fully support its deeper rhythms. That possibility is not mysterious when placed against human origins. The human nervous system was not formed in sealed bedrooms, in constant temperature, or in a world where light and darkness could be separated from the sun with such precision. It developed in open and changing environments, where sleep had to remain flexible. The sleeping person in prehistoric conditions was never completely separate from the world. Even when rest was deep, the body still occupied a landscape of faint sounds, cooling air, nearby breathing, distant movement, and the subtle pressure of ground beneath it. The point is not to imagine that earlier humans slept better in a simple or romantic sense. The point is that the body learned to sleep within variation, not outside it. When variation disappears, the body does not stop sleeping, but some part of the familiar pattern may become thinner. This helps explain why the feeling of tiredness after sleep can be so difficult to name. It is not always the result of a dramatic interruption. It may come from sleep that is technically intact yet contextually altered. The body goes through the night, but not within the same field of cues that once shaped how night was understood. The modern idea of good sleep often focuses on stillness and continuity, and those things can certainly matter, but the older human pattern may have involved something more textured. Rest may have been supported by subtle transitions rather than by total uniformity. The body may have expected a night that changed around it, not a night that remained almost identical from beginning to end. This is where the quiet mismatch returns. The body completes the visible task of sleeping, but the invisible relationship between sleep and environment may no longer be as complete as it once was. That does not mean every modern night is unnatural, or that there is a single lost condition that would solve the question. Human sleep has always varied across place, climate, social life, and historical period. The broader pattern remains useful. For a very long time, human rest developed in contact with the outside world, and the body still carries that history. So when waking feels dull, heavy, or strangely unfinished after what seems like a complete night, it may be because the body is not judging sleep by hours alone. It may be responding to a deeper standard, shaped over generations. in which restoration depends on rhythm, transition, and environmental fit as much as on time spent unconscious. In that light, tiredness after sleep begins to look less like a contradiction and more like a message from an older body still trying to rest inside a newer kind of night. The difficulty with sleep is that it can look complete from the outside while remaining incomplete in the way the body seems to register it. A person may spend the expected number of hours in bed, pass through the night without obvious interruption, and still wake with the impression that the body has only paused rather than recovered. This impression matters because it suggests that the body does not treat sleep as a simple switch between being awake and being restored. There is a middle space, one that is easy to overlook, where the body appears to rest but does not fully arrive at the state we imagine rest should produce. In modern life, that middle space is often hidden by language. Sleep is treated as if it were a single event, something either achieved or missed, and once it is achieved, recovery is expected to follow automatically. But the body is more layered than that. Sleep is not one condition. It is a movement through conditions, guided by internal rhythms that are constantly interacting with the outside world. The human organism did not develop in circumstances where night was flat, silent, and mechanically reliable. It developed in places where darkness deepened unevenly, where temperature dropped in ways the skin could register, where the sounds of insects, wind, water, or nearby bodies formed a changing background that never entirely disappeared. These were not merely details around sleep. They were part of the setting in which human rest took shape over very long stretches of time. From that perspective, it becomes easier to understand why the body may not measure a full night in the same way modern schedules do. What counts for the body may include whether the night carried recognizable transitions, whether the nervous system received the signals it was prepared to interpret, whether rest unfolded within a surrounding pattern that made biological sense. In prehistoric and early historical conditions, sleep was not detached from communal and environmental rhythms. Human groups often slept in proximity, and the body likely adjusted not only to darkness and ground, but also to the subtle reassurance or alertness created by nearby presence. Rest was part of a shared space and a living environment, not a private sealed chamber. Today, many sleeping spaces reduce variation as much as possible. The room stays nearly the same across hours. Light can disappear suddenly. Sound can be erased. Temperature can remain almost unchanged. These conditions may feel ideal because they reduce obvious disturbance, yet the body may still experience them as a thinner kind of night, one that allows sleep to happen but does not fully mirror the textured conditions within which human sleep developed. This is not an argument that earlier people were always better rested, because their sleep also existed within hardship, cold, insecurity, illness, and many pressures that modern people do not face in the same way. It is simply a reminder that sleep evolved inside contact, not isolation, and inside variation, not total consistency. The modern body, carrying older patterns, may therefore complete the biological mechanics of sleep while still waking with a vague sense that some deeper process did not fully settle. That sensation can feel frustrating because it lacks a clear cause, yet its very vagueness may be part of its meaning. It is not necessarily a sign that sleep failed in a direct or dramatic way. It may be the feeling produced when the body's internal rhythms continue to operate inside an external world that no longer provides the same kind of guidance those rhythms once expected. In that sense, the body that sleeps but does not feel reset is not necessarily malfunctioning. It may be responding faithfully to a long history that shaped how human rest was once organized. The tiredness that remains in the morning is then more than a symptom of one poor night. It is a quiet reminder that the human body does not rest in abstraction. It rests in relation to a world, and when that world changes faster than the body's deeper expectations, sleep can remain real while restoration begins to feel strangely incomplete. Modern sleep often feels natural because it is familiar, but familiarity is not the same as historical depth. The idea that a person should enter sleep once, remain asleep in a single long block, and wake at the end as though crossing a clean bridge from night into morning is, in many ways, a recent arrangement. It fits the architecture of modern life very well. Work begins at set hours, homes are divided into private rooms, artificial light extends the evening and then disappears at command. Beds create a clear boundary between waking space and sleeping space. In this setting, continuous sleep appears normal, even inevitable. But if we step back toward the longer beginning of human life, the shape of the night becomes less smooth. For most of human history, people did not sleep in environments where darkness, temperature, sound, and social space could be controlled so completely. Rest happened within changing conditions, and those conditions likely shaped not only how humans slept, but what the body came to recognize as a night of rest. This matters because the body does not carry only biological mechanisms. It also carries patterns of timing and expectation formed over very long stretches of adaptation. A person in a prehistoric landscape did not lie down inside a sealed chamber with stable air and managed silence. The body settled onto ground or simple materials, remained exposed to gradual changes in the environment, and stayed near other people whose movements, breathing, and occasional waking would have been part of the night itself. In such conditions, sleep may not always have unfolded as one clean and uninterrupted block. Historical evidence from later periods, along with broader anthropological comparison, suggests that human sleep has often been more segmented than modern assumptions allow. People in pre-industrial settings, in some societies, describe periods of waking within the night as ordinary rather than alarming. That does not prove one universal pattern for all humans across all times, and it would be inaccurate to force a single sleep model onto the entire past. But it does show that the modern expectation of perfectly continuous sleep is not the only form human rest has taken. Once that expectation is loosened, a different possibility begins to appear. The body may still be living with rhythms shaped in a world where the night was not always one seamless descent into unconsciousness. If so, then the modern structure of sleep may not fully match the older structure the body was prepared to inhabit. The issue is not simply interruption, it is rhythm. A segmented or lightly varied night is different from a damaged night. Short periods of wakefulness, shifts in body position, awareness of nearby sound, and gradual changes in cold or darkness may once have existed inside a broader resting pattern without destroying it. In fact, those subtle changes may have been part of how the body organized the night. The modern effort to eliminate all variation may therefore create a strange effect. Sleep becomes longer and more contained, yet the body may not always interpret that containment as complete restoration. The night looks whole from the clock's point of view, but the older body may still be expecting phases, transitions, and cues that no longer arrive. This does not mean that continuous sleep is unnatural in any absolute sense, or that earlier humans were more rested in a way modern people have lost. The past included danger, cold, vulnerability, and many forces that could make rest difficult. Still, the structure of sleep itself was likely more closely tied to environment and social presence than many modern people assume. That older structure may help explain why a person can sleep for many hours and still feel as if the night passed too smoothly across the surface, without fully reaching whatever part of the body was meant to recover. The question begins to change here. It is no longer only about whether sleep happened, but about whether the form sleep now takes is the same form the human body learned to trust over the long beginning of its history, or whether the body is still carrying a quieter memory of nights that unfolded in pieces rather than in one continuous line. To imagine a more segmented night is difficult now, because modern life teaches the body to think of sleep as a single event with a clear beginning and a clear end. Evening is extended by artificial light. Activity continues late, and then the body is expected to enter rest in one deliberate movement, as though the night were a smooth container into which consciousness simply disappears. Yet the older human relationship with darkness was slower and less sharply divided. Before artificial lighting reshaped the evening, darkness arrived in layers. The fading of daylight changed vision, temperature, sound, and social behavior gradually. People did not step from a fully lit world into a fully controlled sleeping space. They moved into night through a sequence of environmental shifts, and the body likely adjusted to those shifts long before sleep fully deepened. That kind of entry matters because the body often responds not only to states, but to transitions between states. A modern night can remove many of those transitions. Light vanishes all at once, temperature remains nearly unchanged. The surrounding environment becomes simplified and quiet in a way that earlier humans rarely experienced. Even when this feels comfortable, it may also flatten the process by which the body once recognized that the world had entered its resting phase. Across the broader history of human life, and even into more recent pre-industrial societies, sleep could include intervals that were not treated as failure. People sometimes woke in the night, remained quietly awake for a period, then returned to sleep without assuming anything had gone wrong. Historical accounts from later societies suggest that such rhythms were familiar enough to be described in ordinary terms. That does not prove that all humans everywhere slept in exactly the same segmented pattern, and it would be misleading to turn one historical tendency into a universal law. Human sleep has always varied across climate, season, social setting, and way of life. But what this does suggest is that the modern ideal of one continuous and uninterrupted block of sleep is not the only pattern the human body has known. Once this becomes visible, a quieter possibility appears. The body that wakes tired may not simply be missing hours. It may be moving through a form of night that is more uniform than the rhythms around which human rest was shaped. In prehistoric conditions, the night was rarely a blank interval. There were small sounds from the landscape, changes in cold across the skin, shifts in the position of others nearby, and the ongoing fact that sleeping meant remaining inside a world that had not stopped existing. Rest was part of that world, not an escape from it. The body may therefore have learned to organize its restoration not inside perfect continuity, but inside a looser pattern of drifting, settling, briefly rising toward awareness, and returning again. If so, then a night that is technically complete by modern standards may still feel strangely thin to a body that carries older expectations. The issue is not that fragmented sleep is automatically better. Too much disruption can clearly reduce rest. The point is more precise than that. The body may not interpret continuity in the exact way modern schedules do. It may respond more deeply to whether the night has a meaningful structure of transitions, cues, and environmental texture. When those elements are reduced, the body can still sleep, but the experience of waking may lose some sense of depth. That may be why tiredness after sleep sometimes feels difficult to explain. The person did sleep, the hours did pass, yet some part of the night may not have unfolded in a way the body fully recognizes. In that sense, the modern block of sleep may solve one problem by creating another quieter one. It gives duration, privacy, and control, but it may also move the body further away from the slower, more varied night in which human rest first took shape, leaving behind the strange feeling that sleep occurred, but did not entirely reach its destination. What makes this idea difficult to accept is that modern sleep appears so orderly. It has a beginning, a duration, and an ending that can be counted. It fits calendars, alarms, and work days. Because of that, it feels objective, as though the shape of the night has finally become correct. Yet order is not the same thing as biological familiarity. A system can be efficient by modern standards and still remain slightly foreign to a body shaped under very different conditions. When we imagine the long human past, it is tempting to focus on hardship alone. But for the question of sleep, another detail matters just as much: the structure of the night itself. The body did not evolve under a schedule enforced by clocks. It moved with light, with season, with temperature, with social rhythm, and with the changing demands of safety and rest. In that world, sleep was almost certainly not identical from one night to the next. It may have deepened, loosened, paused, and resumed according to conditions that the body read continuously. That kind of night leaves a different imprint than one built around fixed expectation. It teaches the body that rest belongs inside variation. Once that is understood, the modern feeling of sleeping long enough without feeling restored begins to look less strange. The body may not be confused by sleep itself. It may be responding to the fact that modern sleep is unusually compressed into a single, sealed block. A person lies down at a chosen hour, enters a stable environment, remains in it for many hours, and then exits it abruptly when morning arrives by alarm, routine, or artificial light. From the outside, this arrangement appears ideal because it reduces unpredictability. But the deeper history of human rest suggests that predictability alone may not be the whole of what the body needs in order to feel that a night was complete. The body may also be reading rhythm, texture, and transition. It may be asking whether the night unfolded in a way that still resembles the slower descent and more varied structure in which human sleep took Archaeological evidence cannot tell us exactly how every prehistoric night felt, and it would be dishonest to claim certainty about such intimate details. But the broader human setting is clear enough. For most of our species' history, sleep happened in small groups, in direct contact with natural cycles, and without the level of environmental control that now feels ordinary. The body therefore developed under conditions where waking briefly, shifting often, or sleeping in proximity to others may have been normal parts of rest rather than signs that rest had failed. Later historical records from some pre-industrial societies support the idea that segmented sleep was familiar in certain settings. That evidence should be handled carefully, because it does not define all humans everywhere. Even so, it helps loosen a modern assumption that one unbroken block is the timeless standard by which all real sleep should be measured. Once that assumption softens, the morning feeling of incompleteness becomes easier to interpret. It may not mean that the body is broken or that the night was objectively too short. It may mean that the form of sleep was complete by the clock, but thinner by older biological expectations. The body may still carry a deeper pattern, in which rest was strengthened by a night with more gradation, more environmental cues, and more continuity with the living world outside the sleeper. A modern night often removes those things in exchange for comfort and efficiency. That trade can be useful, but it may also leave the body with a subtle sense that something in the structure of rest has been simplified too far. This is why the question cannot be answered by hours alone. A full night may be full only in one sense. In another sense, it may still be missing the layered rhythm that once helped the body recognize rest as complete. The tiredness that remains in the morning may therefore be less a contradiction than a sign that the body still remembers nights that did not pass in one smooth line, and still measures restoration against patterns older than the modern room in which it now tries to sleep. A modern room at night can feel almost unnaturally complete. The door is closed, the temperature is managed, the bed is soft, and the surrounding space has been emptied of most interruptions. It seems like the ideal setting for rest because it offers what earlier human life rarely could, control. Yet, the body did not first learn to sleep in conditions of near total control. It learned to sleep in places where the night remained active in subtle ways. Even when human movement slowed, darkness was never pure silence. Air moved across skin. Insects made low repeating sounds. Water could be heard at a distance. Wind pressed lightly against grass, brush, hide, or wood. Nearby bodies shifted in sleep, breathed, coughed, turned, settled again. None of this necessarily prevented rest. In fact, over the long beginning of human life, such signals may have formed part of the background that made the night legible to the body. This matters because the nervous system does not simply shut down when sleep begins. It changes mode, but it remains responsive. Even in deep rest, the body continues to monitor the world to some degree, filtering, sorting, and reacting at low levels to what surrounds it. That responsiveness is not a flaw. It is part of how a vulnerable animal sleeps. For prehistoric humans, complete unconscious separation from the environment would not have been an ideal state in every context. Safety depended partly on sleeping near others, within shared rhythms, while still remaining faintly available to important signals. A night cry, a sudden movement, a shift in weather, or the uneasy reaction of the group could all matter. The body was shaped inside that kind of world, where rest and low-level awareness were not opposites but overlapping conditions. If that is true, then the modern idea that the best sleep happens in a perfectly silent and sealed environment may be more culturally intuitive than biologically complete. Silence can feel peaceful, but for a body formed across generations in living soundscapes, total quiet may also be strangely thin. The point is not that noise is good in itself, nor that disturbance improves rest. Sharp interruption clearly has the power to reduce sleep. The distinction is more delicate. There is a difference between disruptive sound and the quiet continuity of a natural environment. One breaks the rhythm, the other may help create it. For much of human history, the night likely carried this quieter continuity. The body rested not in emptiness, but in relation to an ongoing world that had softened without disappearing. That kind of night may have offered not only risk, but also structure. It gave the body signals that the world was in its resting phase without becoming unreal or blank. those signals are removed. The result is comfort, but also sensory reduction. A person can lie in darkness without temperature change, without layered natural sound, without the small cues that once connected sleep to place. The body still sleeps, but it may do so in a night that feels less meaningful to its deeper rhythms. This could help explain why waking can sometimes feel flat even after many hours. The issue may not be that the body fell to sleep, but that the surrounding night failed to provide the kind of subtle continuity within which human sleep first became organized. Archaeology cannot recover the sound of an ancient night directly, and it would be inaccurate to claim certainty about what every human group experienced. Still, the wider human setting is clear enough. Foragers, early settlers, and later pre-industrial communities all lived much closer to environmental variation than most modern sleepers do. The night around them remained present, not absent. That presence may have shaped not only vigilance but restoration itself. If so, then the body that wakes tired may be carrying an old expectation into a newer kind of silence. It may not need chaos, but it may still recognize rest through forms of gentle continuity that modern life has thinned out. In that case, the feeling of incomplete recovery is not simply about what happened inside the body during sleep. It is also about what kind of night the body was sleeping inside, and whether that night still resembled the living world in which human rest first learned how to unfold. Silence, in modern life, is often treated as the natural companion of good sleep. A quiet room suggests safety, privacy, and the removal of disturbance. It feels logical that the less the body has to hear, the more fully it can rest. Yet this idea becomes less certain when placed against the longer history of human life. For most of that history, the night was not silent in the modern sense, but neither was it chaotic. It carried a low and continuous background of environmental sound that changed gently over hours without disappearing. Wind moved through grass or trees. Water ran nearby or at a distance. Insects, birds, and other animals contributed faint rhythms that rose and fell with place, season, and climate. Fire shifted softly. Other human bodies breathed, turned, murmured, or coughed in sleep. These were not dramatic events. They were part of the ordinary texture of the night, and the body may have learned to interpret that texture not as interference, but as a kind of continuity. This possibility matters because the nervous system does not enter sleep by becoming absent. It remains active in different ways, constantly filtering which sounds signal danger, which ones can be ignored, and which ones belong to the expected pattern of the environment. This kind of filtering is a basic feature of mammalian sleep. The sleeping body is not fully cut off from the world, it stays faintly connected to it. For a species shaped in open or semi-open settings, often sleeping near others and without strong physical barriers, this low-level connection would have mattered. It allowed the body to rest while preserving a small degree of responsiveness to meaningful change. In that older setting, a night with familiar sounds may have supported rest by giving the nervous system evidence that the environment was stable in the way it was supposed to be stable. Familiar sound does not only mean pleasant sound, it means patterned sound that belongs to a living world continuing around the sleeper. Modern silence removes much of that pattern. A sealed room may reduce interruption, but it can also create an environment that is unusually empty from the point of view of an older nervous system. The body still sleeps inside that emptiness, but it may do so without some of the cues that once helped confirm that the night was unfolding normally. That does not mean ancient humans slept better because they heard more. Their nights could also include fear, discomfort, sudden threat, and true disturbance. The point is narrower and more careful. The body may distinguish between unpredictable noise and the soft continuity of a natural soundscape. One activates attention in a sharper way. The other may form part of the background within which attention can gradually loosen without fully disappearing. If so, then the modern preference for complete silence may not always align perfectly with the deeper history of human rest. The archaeological record cannot tell us exactly what a sleeper felt in a prehistoric camp or early settlement, and it would be dishonest to claim that all human groups responded to sound in the same way. Environments differed widely across forests, grasslands, coastlines, cold regions, and more settled agricultural settings. Still, one broad point remained stable across those differences. Human sleep developed in worlds where the night remained sensorially present. Sound was rarely absent. atmosphere of being alive among other living things. A body shaped over generations in such conditions may not interpret total sensory reduction as the fullest form of rest. It may accept it, adapt to it, and still carry a quieter expectation of rhythm outside itself. This helps explain why some mornings feel incomplete in a way that is difficult to name. The body may have slept long enough, but the night around it may have felt strangely unreal to older layers of the nervous system. Restoration, then, may depend not only on the absence of disruption, but on the presence of recognizable continuity. A night that is too empty may leave the body resting in technical terms, while remaining slightly unconvinced that it was ever fully inside the kind of world where human sleep first learned to feel safe enough and real enough to restore what waking life had slowly worn down. The idea of a perfectly quiet night feels soothing, partly because it promises separation. It suggests that the body can finally leave the world behind, withdraw from contact, and enter rest without interference. In modern life, that image has become closely tied to the meaning of good sleep. A quiet room feels like a protected room, and protection seems naturally linked to recovery. But the longer human story suggests that rest did not usually emerge from full separation. It emerged from a more delicate arrangement, one in which the body remained inside a living environment that had softened, but had not disappeared. This difference matters because the body does not only respond to danger, it also responds to pattern. A low, continuous pattern in the environment can signal that the world is stable in the way it is expected to be stable. For most of human history, night would have offered that kind of pattern. It may have been faint, uneven, and different from place to place, but it was rarely empty. There were small sounds from land, weather, water, animals, and other people nearby. Those sounds were not always pleasant, and they were not always harmless, but many of them belonged to the ordinary structure of the night. They gave the sleeping body a sensory background against which meaningful change could stand out. In that setting, safety may not have meant silence. It may have meant familiarity within variation. This is an important distinction. The nervous system of a sleeping human does not go fully offline. It continues, at a lower level, to sort the world. It remains able to react if something changes sharply enough. That ability would have mattered deeply in prehistoric and early historical life, when sleep often happened near others, close to the ground, and in direct relation to weather, animals, and group movement. A body that could rest while still maintaining a soft edge of responsiveness would have been better suited to such conditions than a body that required total sensory absence. Over many generations, this may have helped shape a form of sleep that was not built on emptiness, but on selective attention within a living soundscape. If that is true, then the modern sleeping environment may solve one problem while creating a subtler one. It removes many obvious disturbances, but it may also remove the pattern continuity that once helped the body feel that the night was unfolding normally. The result can be a strange kind of rest, uninterrupted on the surface, yet thin in how it is felt afterward. A person may sleep through the night and still wake with the impression that the body never settled all the way down, not because it remained actively alert, but because the surrounding night did not fully resemble the kind of environment in which human sleep first became organized. It is important to be careful here. This does not mean the body needs noise in order to rest, and it certainly does not mean that all forms of environmental sound are helpful. Sudden, harsh, or unpredictable noise can clearly disturb sleep. The contrast is not between noise and silence in a simple sense. It is between disruptive interruption and gentle continuity. In older human settings, the night likely contained much more of the second kind. Archaeology cannot recover the exact auditory experience of an ancient camp, and no honest account should pretend otherwise. But the broad conditions are well grounded. Human beings spent most of their history in environments where they remained immersed in natural cycles and in the presence of others. Sleep happens within that immersion. Even later agricultural and pre-industrial communities lived much closer to the night as a sensorial reality than many modern sleepers do now. That continuity may have done more than merely surround sleep. It may have helped shape the internal sense that rest was taking place within a world that still made biological sense. This is why the feeling of tiredness after a full night can be so difficult to explain. The body may have received enough hours, yet not enough of the older signals that once framed those hours. It may have crossed the night in technical terms while remaining slightly unconvinced by the world through which it crossed. In that case, morning tiredness is not simply a measure of how long sleep lasted. It is also a sign that restoration may depend on how real, how textured, and how quietly continuous the night feels to a body still carrying the deeper memory of sleeping inside a world that never went silent, only softer. Even when the body appears completely at rest, it does not fully let go of the world. This is one of the quieter truths hidden inside sleep, and it helps explain why a person can spend many hours in bed and still wake with the feeling that some deeper level of release never arrived. From the outside, sleep looks like surrender. The muscles soften, the eyes close, breathing slows, and the person becomes still enough to seem absent from the surrounding world. But beneath that stillness, the body continues to monitor, adjust, and remain faintly available. The heart does not simply beat on its own without change. Breathing continues to respond. The brain remains active in shifting patterns. The skin still receives temperature. The ears still receive sound. Sleep is not the removal of connection. It is a change in the kind of connection the body maintains. This matters because the human body was not shaped in conditions where total vulnerability was safe. For most of human history, sleeping meant becoming less aware, but not becoming unreachable. In a prehistoric shelter, near a fire, beneath open sky, or later within simple dwellings shared with others, the body could not afford to abandon all contact with its surroundings. A sudden cry from a child, movement from nearby bodies, a change in wind, a shift in weather, or a sound in the dark could matter. The body therefore evolved not toward perfect shutdown, but toward a layered form of rest in which some systems could recover while a softer edge of vigilance remained. This is not a sign that humans were designed to sleep badly. It is a sign that human sleep developed under conditions where safety was relative, not absolute. Rest had to coexist with a limited but important degree of responsiveness. Once this is understood, modern tiredness begins to look different. The person who wakes feeling unrefreshed may not always be suffering from obvious interruption. The body may simply be carrying an older design into an environment that no longer matches the conditions under which that design first made sense. In modern life, sleep often takes place in spaces that aim for complete security and sensory reduction. Doors lock, walls separate, temperature is controlled, and the surrounding environment becomes highly stable. These conditions remove many burdens, and in many ways they protect sleep. Yet they may also create a strange mismatch. The body still holds patterns formed in a world where rest depended on selective awareness, but the night around it has become unusually sealed. That seal may not produce a clear biological error, yet it may alter how the body distributes its attention during sleep. If the body is built to rest while lightly tracking a living world, then a night that feels too detached from that world may not produce the same depth of subjective release. The body sleeps, but some part of it may remain subtly unresolved, not because danger is present, but because the structure of rest no longer feels fully familiar. Archaeology cannot show us the inner state of a sleeper thousands of years ago, and no careful account should claim certainty about how prehistoric humans felt when they woke. But the wider setting is well established. Humans spent most of their history in small groups, close to environmental change, with limited physical separation from the night. Under those conditions, sleep would have unfolded within shared vulnerability and shared protection. Later historical societies, too, often slept in more communal arrangements than modern people do, with thinner walls, more ambient sound, and less private isolation. Across these different settings, one broad pattern remains plausible. The body learned to rest without fully disappearing from the world. That older pattern may still shape modern mornings. When waking feels heavy, incomplete, or strangely shallow after many hours, the issue may not be that sleep failed in a simple sense. It may be that full restoration depends not only on unconsciousness, but on how the body balances release and awareness across the night. If modern sleep asks for a deeper separation than the body was originally shaped to trust, then tiredness may remain not as a dramatic warning, but as a quiet residue of that unresolved balance, a sign that the body can lie down, close its eyes, and pass through the night, while still holding on to more of the world than we realize. What feels like incomplete rest may begin in this very balance, not at the level of obvious waking, but at the level of how deeply the body is willing, or able, to release its hold on the environment while sleeping. Modern language often divides the night too sharply. The person is either awake or asleep, alert or resting, aware or unconscious. But the body rarely works in such clean opposites. Human sleep is layered, and within those layers the nervous system continues to sort the world in quiet ways. Some signals are ignored, others remain capable of drawing the sleeper closer to waking. And this constant filtering is not accidental. It reflects a deeper inheritance from conditions in which sleep was never fully separated from the need to remain softly available to change. Across most of human existence, this availability would have been practical. Small groups slept together. Infants required attention. The sleeping place itself could shift in warmth, sound, or safety over the course of a night. To rest in such a setting did not mean vanishing from the world. It meant narrowing attention without erasing it. The body could loosen, but not disappear. That older arrangement may still shape the sleeping human today, even inside houses, behind locked doors, and far from the pressures that first gave such vigilance its value. If so, then the body that wakes tired may not necessarily be waking from a failed night. It may be waking from a night in which some quiet proportion of attention was never fully allowed to settle. This does not have to mean anxiety in the modern sense, nor does it require any visible sign of stress. The body can hold a low level of readiness without the person feeling frightened or consciously alert. That readiness may operate beneath notice, especially when the external environment is stable enough to prevent clear disturbance. Yet, even in stability, the nervous system may continue to perform a form of background monitoring simply because that is part of what human sleep has long involved. In prehistoric camps, early settlements, and later pre-industrial homes, this would not have been a defect. It would have been part of what made sleep compatible with life in shared, changing conditions. The body learned to recover while keeping one small part of itself available to the world. The question becomes more complicated in modern settings because those settings reduce the kinds of cues the body once monitored. The environment is quieter, more sealed, and more uniform. At first, this seems like it should make full release easier, but the relationship may not be so simple. The body shaped for rest inside a living and variable night may not always know what to do with a night that feels almost detached from the world. Instead of fully relaxing into perfect safety, it may continue to maintain subtle readiness because the deeper pattern of sleep still assumes a surrounding environment that can change. In other words, the body may still be performing an old form of vigilance inside a new form of shelter. This could help explain the strangely incomplete character of some mornings. Nothing dramatic happened. The person did not fully wake. The hours were sufficient. Yet the body seems to have spent the night slightly occupied, not by obvious danger, but by a low and continuous act of holding itself in relation to the world. Archaeological evidence cannot reveal the exact degree of this ancient vigilance, and no responsible account should pretend that all human groups slept in the same way. Conditions varied widely by climate, terrain, group size, season, and material culture. Still, one broad truth remains well grounded. Human beings did not spend most of their history sleeping in perfectly insulated environments. Their rest unfolded in partial exposure, in proximity to others, and within nights that remained sensorially alive. Under those circumstances, a sleeping body that retained some degree of responsiveness would have made sense. That pattern may still remain with us now. So when sleep seems to happen without producing full renewal, one possibility is that the body has not forgotten how to sleep, but has not fully forgotten how to watch either. Tiredness, then, may come not only from insufficient sleep, but from a deeper compromise built into human rest itself, a compromise between surrender and awareness that once protected the sleeper, but now may leave behind a faint and difficult-to-name residue in the morning, as though the body rested, but never completely released its place in the world. The deeper question is not whether the body can sleep, but whether it can ever sleep in a completely unguarded way. Modern imagination often treats true rest as total release, as though the best night would be one in which the body drops every remaining tie to the outside world and returns in the morning untouched by any need to monitor, prepare, or respond. It is an appealing image, but it may not match the longer structure of human sleep. A body shaped over vast stretches of time in uncertain environments would not have been built for absolute surrender. It would have been built for selective surrender, enough to restore itself, but not so much that it became unreachable when the world changed around it. This distinction helps us bring the earlier ideas into focus. The body that wakes tired after many hours may not be failing at sleep in a simple sense. It may be experiencing the cost of this older design, a form of rest that was never meant to be pure withdrawal. Across the long beginning of human life, rest happened in small groups, under variable skies, near sources of sound, temperature change, and movement. Even where shelter existed, it rarely created the total sensory separation that modern rooms now provide. The sleeping body, therefore, had to do two things at once. It had to recover from effort, and it had to remain faintly oriented within a world that was still continuing around it. This layered arrangement may have been one reason human sleep could coexist with vulnerability for so long. The sleeper was not fully present to the world, but not fully absent either. In that older setting, this was not an obstacle to rest. It was part of how rest became possible. The difficulty appears when such a system is carried into a world that assumes the opposite. Modern sleep culture often imagines that the body should be able to shut down almost completely if the room is comfortable enough. But comfort may not erase deeper patterns. The nervous system may still maintain a low level of responsiveness, simply because that is part of what human sleep has always been. This does not mean the body is distressed every night, or that it remains on the edge of waking in any obvious way. It means that sleep itself may contain a quiet compromise, one that is easy to miss because it usually happens beneath awareness. The body rests, but some thin thread of connection remains. Over one night, this may be barely noticeable. Over many nights, it may help explain why rest can feel incomplete even when nothing seems wrong. The person sleeps, the morning comes, and yet the body feels as though it has been carrying something all night that it never fully put down. That feeling is difficult to describe because it is not the same as stress, fear, or insomnia. It is gentler than that, more like residue than interruption. Archaeology cannot measure such residue directly, and no careful account should pretend to know the inner experience of prehistoric sleepers with certainty. But the broader human pattern is firm enough to support the possibility. Human beings evolved in environments where sleep and vigilance had to overlap. Early communities, like later pre-industrial ones, often rested in conditions of shared exposure and shared protection. The body would have been shaped by that balance over many generations. If modern tiredness sometimes persists after a full night of sleep, then part of the reason may be that the balance never disappeared. It simply became less visible. Behind the closed door, in the quiet room, under stable temperature and controlled darkness, the body may still be carrying an older instruction: rest. But do not fully abandon the world. That instruction may no longer be as useful as it once was, but the body does not erase such inheritances quickly. It holds them in posture, in rhythm, in attention, and perhaps in sleep as well. This is why waking tired can feel so strange. The night seems complete, yet the body behaves as though part of it remained occupied. Not because it made a mistake, but because human rest may have always depended on a form of partial awareness that protected our ancestors and still lingers now, leaving modern sleep caught between safety and watchfulness, between comfort and inheritance, between the wish to let go and the older biological habit of never letting go completely. Light feels simple when it is controlled, but for most of human history it was never a single, steady condition. It moved slowly across the day, softened into evening, and faded into darkness in a way that the body could follow without needing to think. The change was gradual, and that gradualness carried information. As the light lowered, the world did not suddenly stop. Shapes became less defined, colours shifted, temperature often dropped, and the pace of human activity eased in response. The body did not receive a command to sleep. It received a sequence of signals that suggested the day was ending, and that rest would soon become appropriate. In that older setting, sleep began before sleep itself. It began in the transition toward night. Modern life has altered this transition in ways that are easy to overlook because they feel normal. Artificial lighting allows the evening to extend far beyond the natural setting of the sun. The body can remain in a bright environment even when the outside world has already moved into darkness. Then, at a chosen moment, the light can disappear almost completely. The room shifts from brightness to darkness in a way that is immediate rather than gradual. From a practical point of view, this is efficient. It gives control over time and activity, but from the perspective of a body shaped across long exposure to natural light cycles, this shift changes the structure of the night. The signals that once unfolded over hours can now be compressed into minutes. The body still responds, but it may do so with less guidance from the surrounding environment. This matters because human sleep is closely tied to internal rhythms that are influenced by light. These rhythms are not exact clocks in the mechanical sense. They are patterns that align the body with the general cycle of day and night. In natural conditions, light changes provided a continuous reference for these patterns. As daylight faded, the body began to adjust. Hormonal activity, body temperature, and alertness all shifted in relation to the changing environment. The process was not instantaneous. It was paced by the world itself. When artificial light alters that pacing, the body is asked to transition more abruptly. It may still enter sleep, but the path into sleep can become less connected to the gradual signals that once prepared it. Over many nights, this may influence how the body experiences rest, even if the total duration of sleep appears sufficient. Archaeological evidence cannot show us how individuals felt as light faded in prehistoric settings, but it can show us that human life was organized around natural cycles for the vast majority of our existence. Before the widespread use of artificial lighting, evening activity was constrained by what could be seen and by the availability of fire or simple lamps. The intensity and reach of those light sources were limited compared to modern systems. This means that the body would have spent long periods adjusting to dimming conditions rather than remaining in extended brightness. The night, in that sense, was not a sudden event. It was a process. That process may have helped guide the body into rest in ways that are less present today. When the modern environment shortens or replaces that process, the body can still sleep, but it may enter sleep with a different internal state. The feeling of tiredness after a full night may partly reflect this difference. It is not only about how long the body slept, but about how it arrived at sleep. If the transition into the night is abrupt, the deeper systems that prepare the body for restoration may not follow the same path they once did. The body completes the night, but the experience of waking may carry a sense that something in the preparation was incomplete. This does not mean that artificial light is inherently harmful in a simple or universal sense. It has allowed human life to expand in ways that would not otherwise be possible. But it does suggest that the body still carries an expectation of gradual change, an expectation formed in a world where the day did not end all at once. When that expectation is not met, sleep can still occur, yet the result may feel subtly altered. The morning tiredness then may not only reflect what happened during sleep, but also how the body was guided into it, and whether the path from light to darkness still resembles the slower pattern in which human rest first learned how to begin. The change in light does not only mark the difference between day and night, it shapes how the body understands time itself. In natural conditions, time is not experienced as a series of fixed points, but as a gradual unfolding of brightness and darkness that the body can follow without needing to measure it. Morning arrives slowly, light builds across the landscape, shadows shorten, and the body rises with that expansion. Evening moves in the opposite direction, not as an abrupt signal to stop, but as a soft narrowing of visibility that invites the body to reduce activity. Within that pattern, the body does not need to decide when to rest. It is carried toward rest by the world around it. This kind of guidance is subtle, but it is continuous. And it may play a role not only in when sleep begins, but in how deeply the body settles once it arrives. Modern lighting changes this relationship by separating time from the environment. A room can remain bright long after sunset, and the body can remain engaged in activities that feels like daytime even when the outside world has already shifted into night. When the light is finally turned off, the transition is compressed. Instead of moving through a long period of dimming, the body moves from brightness to darkness in a single step. This may seem like a small difference, but for a system that has developed in relation to gradual change, it can alter the internal sense of timing. The body still possesses rhythms that respond to light, but those rhythms may no longer be aligned as smoothly with the conditions in which sleep occurs. The result is not necessarily a failure to sleep, but a difference in how sleep is entered and experienced. The body may arrive at sleep from a state that is less prepared, less transitioned, and therefore less settled. Over the course of a single night, this difference may be barely noticeable, Over many nights, it may accumulate into a feeling that rest has become less complete. Archaeological and historical evidence cannot tell us exactly how each person experienced the fading of light in early human settings, but they do show that for most of human existence, life unfolded without access to sustained artificial brightness. Fire and simple lamps provided limited illumination, often localized and softer than modern light sources. As a result, evening would have involved a natural reduction in visual clarity and activity. Social behavior, movement, and attention would gradually shift in response. The body would have been exposed repeatedly to these patterns, learning to associate dimming light with the approach of rest. This repeated exposure across generations may have shaped not only behavior, but internal timing. In contrast, the modern body often encounters a different pattern. It can remain in high levels of brightness late into the night, engage in complex tasks, and then attempt to enter sleep quickly once the light is removed. The deeper systems that prepare for rest may not always adjust at the same speed as conscious intention. The person decides to sleep, but the body may still be in a state that reflects the earlier brightness. This creates a subtle delay, not necessarily in falling asleep, but in how fully the body settles into the processes that support restoration. When morning arrives, the hours have passed, but the sense of depth within those hours may feel reduced. The tiredness that remains can be understood in this context. It is not only a question of duration, but of alignment. The body may be following its internal patterns, but those patterns may be slightly out of step with the environment that surrounds them. Light, which once provided a continuous reference, has become something that can be switched on and off at will. This gives control, but it also removes the gradual guidance that once helped the body move naturally into rest. The result is a night that is complete in structure, but thinner in transition. Sleep happens, but the pathway into it may no longer resemble the pathway that shaped human rest over long periods of time. In that sense, waking tired after a full night may not be a contradiction. It may be a reflection of how the body experiences time, light, and transition, and of how those experiences have changed in ways that are subtle enough to be overlooked, yet consistent enough to shape how rest is felt from one morning to the next. What artificial light changes most quietly is not simply the brightness of the evening, but the body's confidence about where it is within the day. In older human settings, this confidence came from repetition in the natural world. Dawn widened slowly, day reached its brightest point, and then softened. Evening dimmed in stages, and darkness settled gradually enough that the body could adjust before sleep began. These changes were not just visual, they were tied to falling temperature, reduced movement, changes in social activity, and the wider slowing of the landscape itself. The body lived inside that sequence for most of human history, and over long periods it learned to treat light not merely as illumination, but as orientation. Light told the body what kind of time it was. Modern life preserves the day and the night as labels, but often breaks the sequence that once connected them. A person can live for many hours under brightness that does not match the outside world, continue thinking, working, moving, and then expect the body to shift quickly into rest because the clock says the day is over. In practical terms, this is normal. In historical terms, it is very new. For most of our species' existence, the body did not have to interpret a night built from artificial brightness followed by sudden darkness. It followed a night that arrived through transition. That difference may seem small because sleep can still happen under modern conditions. But the deeper issue is not whether sleep occurs. It is whether the body enters sleep with the same sense of timing that once guided restoration more naturally. Human biology is deeply responsive to light as a cue for daily rhythm. This is widely accepted, even if the precise details vary between individuals. Light exposure influences alertness, temperature patterns, and the timing of internal processes connected to rest. In natural conditions, these influences were spread across the whole day, especially during the approach of evening. The body did not receive one final signal and then obey. It moved gradually, carried by many small changes that made sleep feel like the continuation of a pattern rather than a sudden interruption of waking life. Archaeology cannot measure ancient internal rhythms directly, but it can place human sleep in environments where artificial control over light was minimal or absent. Foragers, early village communities, and even later agrarian populations lived under conditions in which sunset had material consequences. Activity narrowed, distance became harder to navigate, visual attention changed. Firelight could extend wakefulness to a degree, but it did not erase the night in the way modern illumination can. This means that the transition from day to rest would usually have remained visible and sensorially real. The body would have encountered that pattern again and again across generations. It is reasonable, then, to think that human rest became organized not only around darkness itself, but around the approach to darkness. If that approach is shortened or replaced, the body may still sleep, but it may do so after losing part of the orientation that once prepared it for deeper recovery. This could help explain why a full night sometimes feels strangely incomplete. The person may have spent enough hours asleep, yet the body may have entered those hours without the same gradual descent that older environments provided. The night begins too sharply, and in that sharpness something subtle may be lost. The body lies down, but its deeper systems may still be catching up to a change that happened faster than they were shaped to expect. By morning, the difference may not appear as obvious sleeplessness. It may appear as heaviness, dullness, or the quiet impression that rest occurred only on the surface. This does not mean the modern body is broken, nor that returning to an older world would solve the problem in any simple way. Human sleep in the past existed alongside many hardships, but it does suggest that the body still carries a slower map of how night is supposed to arrive. Artificial light offers freedom, safety, and extended activity, yet it may also ask the body to cross from day into sleep too abruptly. When that happens, night can remain long enough by the clock, while still feeling thinner to the body that must live inside it. The tiredness that follows may therefore be more than a matter of sleep duration. It may be the trace left behind when a species shaped by gradual dusk tries to rest inside a world where evening can be postponed, compressed, and finally switched off in an instant. A modern sleeping place often feels restful because it stays the same. The surface beneath the body is even. The temperature remains almost unchanged, and the night unfolds inside a carefully managed comfort that asks very little adjustment from the skin, the muscles, or the deeper systems that regulate rest. This stability is one of the quiet achievements of modern life, and it is easy to assume that more stability must naturally produce better sleep. Yet the longer human story suggests that the body did not first learn to rest in still and unchanging conditions. It learned to rest on ground that pressed unevenly against the body, under air that cooled and shifted through the night, and within environments where warmth, pressure, and bodily position were never fully fixed for many hours at a time. This matters because the body does not only sleep through the brain, it also sleeps through the skin, through posture, through temperature, through small adjustments that continue even when conscious awareness is gone. For most of human history, the place of sleep was not insulated from the world. Ground retained or released heat depending on season and material. Animal hides, plant coverings, woven mats, or later simple bedding could soften the surface, but they did not erase the body's contact with changing conditions. The air around the sleeper cooled after sunset, warmed with nearby bodies or fire, then shifted again toward morning. These changes were not necessarily comfortable in the modern sense, but they formed part of the environment within which human sleep developed. The body may therefore have learned to organize rest not in spite of variation, but through variation. A slight drop in temperature, a need to turn, a change in pressure along the shoulders or hips, the difference between ground that held warmth and ground that released it. All of these could have provided quiet physical cues that helped structure the night. Modern sleeping environments reduce many of those cues. The mattress distributes pressure more evenly. Bedding preserves warmth more consistently. Climate control keeps the room close to the same temperature from evening to morning. The result is a night that feels smoother, but perhaps also thinner in the kind of physical information it gives the body. This does not mean older conditions were automatically better. Prehistoric and early historical sleep could involve cold, discomfort, dampness, and many burdens that clearly interfered with rest. The point is not to idealize the past. It is to recognize that the human body adapted within contact, not insulation. It became what it is while sleeping in relation to surfaces and temperatures that changed gradually through the night. If those changes once helped the body recognize the passage of night, then removing them may alter how rest is felt. even when sleep remains technically sufficient. Archaeological evidence cannot reveal exactly how warm or comfortable each sleeping place felt, nor can it tell us the inner experience of a sleeper turning on packed earth, reed matting, skins, or simple raised platforms in later settlements. But archaeology does show that for most of human existence, sleep happened close to natural materials and local climate, rather than inside highly standardized sleeping systems. The body would have encountered repeated patterns of thermal change and shifting support over many generations. That long exposure may still matter. A body that wakes tired after many hours may not only be responding to what happened in the brain, it may also be responding to the absence of physical cues that once framed rest more clearly. The modern bed offers softness, consistency, and relief from hardship, yet the body may still carry older expectations about how night should feel across the skin and through posture. A perfectly even night may not always register as a fully meaningful one. The body may sleep within it, but some deeper sense of progression through the night may become less distinct. This could help explain why tiredness after sleep sometimes feels difficult to locate. Nothing clearly went wrong. The room was comfortable. The hours were there. Yet by morning the body feels as though it passed through a night with too little texture, too little change, too little of the subtle physical conversation between body and environment that once shaped human rest. In that sense, the question is not only whether modern sleep is comfortable enough, but whether comfort alone can replace the older cues of ground, temperature, and bodily adjustment through which the human organism first learned how to move from fatigue toward restoration. The body does not remain still simply because it is lying down. Even in sleep, it continues to adjust, shifting weight, changing posture, redistributing pressure across muscles and joints in ways that are usually too small to remember. These movements are not random. They reflect a deeper relationship between the body and the surface beneath it. When that surface changes, even slightly, the pattern of movement changes as well. In earlier human environments, the ground itself provided variation. It was never perfectly even. It could be firm in some places, softer in others, warmer or cooler depending on material, season, and proximity to shared heat. As the night progressed, the body would respond to these differences, turning, settling, lifting pressure from one side and placing it on another. These shifts may have been part of how rest unfolded, not interruptions of it. Movement, in this sense, was not the opposite of sleep, it was woven into it. This becomes important when we consider how modern sleeping surfaces behave. A mattress is designed to distribute weight evenly, to reduce pressure points, and to minimize the need for adjustment. From one perspective, this is beneficial. It removes discomfort and allows the body to remain in one position for longer periods. But from another perspective, it may also reduce the body's need to move in the ways it once did. The surface does more of the work that the body would previously have done through subtle repositioning. The result is a night that appears more still, yet may contain fewer of the small adjustments that once helped the body regulate itself across hours of rest. This does not mean that less movement is always better, or that more movement is always necessary. The relationship is more nuanced. The body may not require constant change, but it may still expect some degree of variation in pressure and posture as part of its resting pattern. In environments where the surface provided that variation naturally, the body's adjustments would have been part of an ongoing conversation with the ground. Each shift in position would slightly alter circulation, muscle tension, and the way weight was carried. These changes could help prevent any one part of the body from remaining under the same conditions for too long. In a modern setting, where the surface absorbs and distributes pressure more evenly, that conversation becomes quieter. The body can remain in similar positions for longer without discomfort forcing a change. This may seem like an advantage, but it may also alter how the body experiences the passage of the night. If earlier human rest included a pattern of small, repeated adjustments guided by uneven surfaces and changing conditions, then a night with fewer such adjustments may feel less dynamic to the body, even if it is more comfortable to the mind. Archaeological evidence cannot tell us how often prehistoric people changed position during sleep, nor can it measure the precise relationship between ground conditions and bodily movement, but it can show us that sleeping surfaces were rarely uniform. People rested on earth, on plant material, on hides, on simple constructed platforms, each of which would have interacted with the body differently. Over generations, the body would have adapted to these conditions, not by remaining completely still, but by adjusting within them. That long adaptation may still shape how the body organizes rest today. When waking feels incomplete, it may not only reflect what happened in the brain or the absence of external disturbance, it may also reflect a quieter absence of physical variation across the night. The body may have remained in positions that were comfortable enough not to require change, yet static enough to reduce the subtle shifts that once helped distribute strain and refresh different parts of the system. This could leave behind a faint sense of heaviness or imbalance, not tied to a single point of discomfort, but spread across the body in a way that is difficult to locate. The night has passed, but the body may feel as though it did not fully move through it. In this way, modern comfort can create a paradox. It protects the body from obvious strain, yet it may also remove some of the small physical processes that once contributed to a deeper sense of renewal. The question then becomes less about whether the body slept, and more about how it moved within that sleep, and whether the stillness offered by modern surfaces truly matches the kind of rest the human organism learned to perform over the long history of its development. The body also reads the night through temperature, and this may be one of the most overlooked differences between modern rest and the older environments in which human sleep first took shape. A modern room often stays within a narrow range from evening to morning. Bedding holds warmth, walls reduce wind, and climate control can make the entire night feel almost unchanged against the skin. This constancy feels protective, and in many ways it is. It reduces exposure, discomfort, and the kinds of physical stress that once made sleep difficult. Yet the body did not develop in a world where the night remained firmly steady. For most of human history, darkness brought gradual cooling. Air shifted in ways the skin could register. Shared body heat mattered. Fire gave warmth, but not in a perfectly even way. Ground released cold differently depending on moisture, material, and season. The body therefore rested inside an environment that changed over hours, and those changes may have helped organize the inner sense of the night. Temperature is not only an external condition, it is part of how the body regulates timing, comfort, and physiological transition. Widely accepted sleep research shows that body temperature and sleep are closely linked, and even without overstating specific mechanisms, it is reasonable to say that the body does not treat warmth and coolness as a relevant background. It responds to them continuously. In older human settings, that response unfolded within a natural rhythm. Evening cooling signaled that the day was ending. Different phases of the night likely carried different thermal textures. Morning brought another shift as light returned and air began to change again. The body did not simply endure these changes, it lived within them. Over generations, sleep would have taken place in contact with this moving thermal landscape, not in isolation from it. Archaeological evidence cannot tell us the precise temperature of every prehistoric sleeping site, nor should anyone pretend that ancient sleep was comfortable in an ideal sense. Many nights in the past would have been cold, damp, or physically demanding, but the broad point is stable. Human beings slept for most of their history in direct relation to local climate, shared shelter, materials close at hand, and the gradual cooling of natural night. The body would have encountered repeated thermal change again and again across long stretches of time. This may help explain why a modern night can feel complete in hours, yet incomplete in outcome. The body may not only need darkness and unconsciousness, it may also respond to the physical progression of the night across the skin. When that progression is flattened, something subtle may be lost. The night becomes easier, but also less articulated. It offers comfort without much change, and the body may pass through it with fewer cues that one phase has given way to another. By morning, that can leave a curious impression. Rest happened, but it feels as though the body moved through a night with too little contour, too little evidence of passage, too little of the old physical dialogue between body and environment that once accompanied the path toward restoration. This does not mean that modern sleepers should want discomfort, or that hardship itself creates better rest. The past should not be romanticized. A cold and exposed night can clearly damage sleep. The point is gentler than that. Between hardship and perfect constancy, there may be a range of subtle variation that the human body still recognizes. The modern room often removes much of this variation in the name of stability. That stability helps in many ways. but it may also reduce the signals through which the body once tracked the night as a living process rather than as a long, unchanging interval. The tiredness that remains after sleep may therefore be partly physical in a deeper sense than it first appears. It may come not only from what happened in the mind, but from the fact that the body spent the night in an environment too smooth in its temperature, too even in its contact, too constant in its support. The full night, then, may still feel thin if the body cannot sense the quiet progression of darkness, coolness, shifting pressure, and shared warmth that once framed human rest from beginning to end, leaving modern sleep comfortable enough to continue, but sometimes too flattened to convince the body that it has fully returned from the work of being alive. By the time night arrives, the modern body has often spent the day in a condition that would have been unusual across most of human history. It has remained indoors, held in chairs, narrowed into repeated positions, and asked to stay mentally active while the larger muscles of the body do relatively little varied work. This kind of day can feel normal because it is common, but the human organism did not take shape inside days built from long stillness. For most of our species' existence, movement was not a separate activity placed beside life. It was the structure of life itself. People walked to gather, to follow water, to maintain social contact, to inspect the land, to carry materials, to respond to weather, to move camp, and later to farm, build, tend animals, and manage the repeated physical tasks of settled life. The body, therefore, did not spend the day waiting for exercise. It spent the day inside movement of different intensities, spread across many hours. This matters for sleep because rest is not only the absence of wakefulness, it is also the body's answer to what the day required. A day filled with varied movement gives the body a clear physical history to recover from. Muscles have changed length and tension in many directions. Joints have passed through ranges of motion. Circulation has risen and settled repeatedly. Breathing has adjusted to effort, posture, terrain, and pace. By evening, the body carries the record of having inhabited space fully. Sleep then arrives not as an isolated event, but as the natural continuation of that physical arc. In contrast, a day of limited movement can create a quieter and more confusing state. The body may feel tired, but that tiredness is often more mental than physical, more like depletion without completion. The nervous system has been occupied, the eyes have worked, attention has been sustained, but the deeper body has not necessarily travelled through the varied forms of exertion that shaped human rest over long stretches of time. This does not mean that every earlier human slept better because life was more active. The past included hardship, injury, hunger, cold, and many conditions that could easily disturb rest. It would be inaccurate to romanticize prehistoric or pre-industrial life, yet the broad pattern remains important. Human sleep developed in bodies that usually move through the world far more than many modern bodies do before lying down. Archaeology and anthropology cannot measure ancient fatigue directly, but they do show that foraging, transport, food preparation, shelter making, and later agricultural labour required repeated daily movement across landscapes and tasks. Even where intensity varied by age, role, season or setting, prolonged total stillness was far less common than it is now. The body that evolved under those conditions may still expect the day to leave a physical imprint before the night can feel complete. When that imprint is weak, sleep may still occur, but the sense of deep restoration may be thinner. This helps explain a familiar, modern contradiction. A person can feel exhausted by evening and still wake unrefreshed. The body was tired enough to want sleep, but perhaps not tired in the older, more integrated sense that comes from having moved through the day with the whole body involved. Instead, the day may have produced a more fragmented fatigue, where attention is overused while posture is undervaried, where the mind is crowded but the body is under-travelled. In that case, sleep becomes harder to organise as a full response. The body lies down carrying strain, but not the kind of strain it was most deeply shaped to resolve. It has been occupied, but not fully spent. It has remained awake for many hours, but not necessarily alive in the broad physical way that once linked day and night more clearly. If so, then tiredness after sleep may not come only from what happened during the night. It may begin much earlier, in the structure of the day itself, in the absence absence of the varied movement through which the human body once accumulated the kind of fatigue that rest could answer more completely. The question is no longer only why sleep feels incomplete, but whether the body can fully recognize night as recovery, when the day before it has become so narrow, so seated, and so physically unfinished. The kind of tiredness that follows a long day of stillness often feels different from the tiredness that follows a day of varied movement. Even when both lead a person towards sleep, one carries a sense of heaviness that is difficult to place, as if the body has been held in position for too long without being allowed to move through its full range. The other carries a quieter sense of completion, where effort has passed through the body and left behind a more even readiness for rest. These two forms of fatigue may look similar from the outside, but the body may not respond to them in the same way once night begins. For most of human history, daily life required the body to move across different patterns rather than remain within a narrow set of positions. Walking alone introduced variation in rhythm, terrain, and posture. Carrying objects shifted weight across shoulders and arms. Gathering, preparing food, tending materials, or building simple structures required reaching, bending, turning, and balancing. Even when work was repetitive, it rarely held the body in a single fixed posture for many hours without change. The body therefore experienced the day as a sequence of physical states rather than a prolonged holding of one state. By evening, muscles have been used in different ways. Joints have moved through multiple ranges, and circulation has adapted to a variety of demands. Sleep, in that context, may have felt like a continuation of a completed arc rather than a pause inside an unfinished one. Modern patterns can be different in a subtle but important way. Many people spend long periods seated, with the same muscles engaged, and others underused. The body can remain in similar positions while the mind shifts through tasks, problems, and information. This creates a form of fatigue that is not always evenly distributed. Some areas of the body hold tension for hours, while others remain relatively inactive. The result can be a sense of tiredness that is both present and incomplete. The body wants rest, but it has not fully moved through the range of activity that once prepared it for rest. When night arrives, this uneven fatigue does not simply disappear. The body carries it into sleep. It may shift position, but the underlying pattern of the day remains, and the deeper systems that coordinate restoration may not engage in the same way as they would after a more varied day. This does not mean that movement automatically guarantees better sleep, or that every form of physical activity leads to deeper rest. Human sleep has always been influenced by many factors, including safety, nutrition, climate, and social structure. It would be inaccurate to reduce the question to a single cause, but it is reasonable to consider that the body may recognize certain kinds of fatigue more clearly than others. A fatigue that comes from varied use of the whole body may provide clearer signals for rest than a fatigue that comes primarily from holding still while remaining mentally active. Archaeological and anthropological evidence supports the idea that human life was, for long periods, structured around repeated movement across landscapes and tasks. Even in later settled societies, daily labor often required more physical variation than is common in many modern environments. The body therefore developed within patterns of use that are broader than those experienced in many contemporary routines. That development may still shape how the body organizes sleep. When waking feels incomplete, it may reflect not only what happened during the night, but also how the body arrived there. If the day did not provide enough variation in movement, the body may not enter sleep with the same kind of integrated fatigue that once guided restoration. Instead, it may carry pockets of tension in areas of underuse that do not resolve easily through stillness alone. This can leave behind a subtle sense that rest did not fully reach every part of the body. The hours have passed, but the distribution of recovery feels uneven, as though some areas settle while others remain slightly held. In this way, the relationship between day and night becomes clearer. Sleep does not begin at the moment the eyes close. It begins in the patterns that fill the hours before. When those patterns become narrower, more seated, and less varied, the body may still sleep, but it may do so without the full range of signals that once helped it recognize that the work of the day had been completed, and that the deeper work of restoration could now unfold without hesitation. What the body may be missing by night is not simply exertion, but a sense of having moved through the day in a way that feels biologically complete. Modern life can produce fatigue without giving that sense. A person may sit for hours, concentrate intensely, feel mentally drained and still arrive at night with a body that seems strangely unfinished, as though wakefulness has consumed energy without fully involving the organism that is supposed to recover from it. This difference may be one reason sleep sometimes feels thin, even when it is long. The body does not respond only to how many hours have passed since morning, it also responds to what those hours contain. For most of human history, the day was not divided between mental occupation and physical stillness in the way it often is now. Attention and movement were more closely joined. To notice the land often meant moving through it. To find food, tend fire, transport materials, or remain with the group required posture changes. Walking, carrying, crouching, rising, turning, and adapting to uneven ground. Even later agricultural or pre-industrial life, though different in many ways from foraging, still tended to bind effort to a larger body rather than confine it, mainly to the eyes, hands, and seated torso. This matters because the body may be best prepared for rest when many of its systems have participated in the day together. Muscles, joints, circulation, breathing, balance, and attention may all contribute to a form of fatigue that feels integrated rather than scattered. Sleep, in that case, becomes the natural response to a completed pattern of use. Modern routines can break that pattern into pieces. The mind may be crowded while the limbs remain underused. The neck, shoulders, hips, and lower back may hold steady tension, while much of the rest of the body passes the day with too little variation. By evening, the person feels spent. The body may not feel evenly spent. It may feel compressed in some regions and untouched in others. This is a difficult state for sleep to answer fully, because sleep is a general process trying to respond to a day that does not engage the body in a general way. It is as though the night receives a mixed message. The organism is tired, but not in the distributed, historically familiar form of tiredness around which human rest was largely shaped. This does not mean that the past offered an ideal model of fatigue. Earlier human lives could be brutally demanding, and excessive labour can clearly damage rest as well as support it. The point is not that more effort is always better. The point is that varied natural movement once formed a more ordinary background to human life than prolonged fixed posture does now. Archaeological and anthropological evidence supports this broad claim, even if the exact intensity of movement varied widely by place, season, age, sex, role, and historical period. The body that evolved across those conditions may still expect the day to involve more whole-body participation than many modern routines require. When that expectation is not met, the body may still fall asleep, but it may not recognize the night as the full answer to the day. This helps illuminate the strange modern experience of waking after many hours with a tiredness that feels both real and incomplete. Perhaps the night did what it could. It restored what had been clearly taxed, but the day had generated a form of depletion that was partly mechanical, partly mental, and only unevenly physical. Some systems were overused through stillness, others underused through absence. In that situation, recovery may remain partial. The person wakes not because sleep failed, but because the body had no fully coherent pattern of effort for sleep to resolve. In that sense, the question of morning tiredness begins earlier than the night and deeper than the bedroom. It begins in whether the body has lived the day in a way that still resembles the kind of moving creature it has been for most of its history. If the answer is only partly yes, then sleep may also be only partly convincing. The night may pass, the eyes may close, the hours may accumulate, and yet the body may wake with the faint impression that something in the day remained unfinished, and that sleep, however long, could only restore a body that had first been used in a way it still knows how to recognize. A full night of sleep is often imagined as something the body can claim by time alone, as though enough hours in darkness should naturally produce enough recovery by morning. But the body is not only measuring time, it is also measuring sequence, rhythm, and the timing of events that happen before rest begins. One of the quietest ways modern life may alter this sequence is through food. Eating is not just fuel in a simple mechanical sense. It is also a signal, one that tells the body something about activity, daylight, safety, and the expected structure of the day. For most of human history, these signals did not arrive in the same stable and repeated pattern that many modern bodies now experience. Human groups did not always eat at fixed hours. The timing, size, and certainty of meals varied movement, seasons, available resources, labour demands, social structure, and later with agricultural cycles and household routines. This does not mean that the past was naturally healthier, or that irregular food access improved sleep. Hunger, scarcity, and unpredictability could place real strain on the body, but it does mean that the human organism developed across long periods in which food timing was tied more closely to environment and activity than to the clock. That older background matters because the body does not separate eating from the larger rhythm of waking and rest. When food enters the day, it becomes part of the body's sense of what phase of the day it is currently living through. In earlier human conditions, eating would often have occurred within broader patterns of daylight, movement, effort, and communal activity. Food was embedded in the shape of the day. In modern life, that embedding can become weaker. Meals can happen late, indoors, under artificial light, after long periods of sitting, and close to the moment when the body is expected to become quiet. The body can adapt to this, but adaptation is not always the same as full alignment. A meal taken at a certain hour may satisfy hunger, yet still alter the flow by which the body moves toward rest. This is not because eating late is universally damaging in a simple or absolute way. Human responses vary, and no single food schedule defines all people. The point is narrower. The body may be sensitive not only to what it eats, but to whether the timing of eating still fits within a rhythm that feels coherent. Archaeology cannot tell us exactly when prehistoric people ate on every day or in every season, and no careful account should pretend that there was one ancient human meal pattern. The evidence instead suggests variety. Foragers responded to opportunity, availability, and movement. Early farmers responded to labour cycles, harvests, storage, and social routines. Across these different worlds, however, one broad fact remains useful. Food timing was more tightly linked to environment and activity than it is in many modern settings, where meals can be detached from light, movement, and natural transitions. This may help explain why sleep can feel less restorative, even when its duration seems complete. The body may be carrying into the night signals that still belong to the active portion of the day. If food arrives late, after artificial brightness, after prolonged mental effort, and without the older environmental cues that once framed the close of waking life, then the body may not pass as smoothly into rest as the clock suggests it should. The night begins, but part of the body may still be organised around digestion, wakeful timing, and the expectation that the active period has not fully ended. By morning, the result may not appear as obvious sleeplessness. It may appear as heaviness, as dullness, or as the persistent feeling that sleep happened without fully reaching the deeper layers of restoration. In that sense, tiredness after a full night may begin not only in the bedroom, but at the dinner table, in the timing of the final meal, and in the larger pattern by which the body tries to understand when the day is truly ending. If food once belonged to a slower and more environmentally guided rhythm of human life, then modern eating may sometimes blur the border between activity and rest, leaving the body asleep in one sense, but not fully convinced that the waking day has actually closed. The body does not treat eating as an isolated act. It places it within a broader pattern of expectation, linking food to movement, light, and the general pace of the day. When those elements move together, the body can read them as a coherent sequence. Hunger builds, effort occurs, food arrives, activity continues or gradually declines, and rest follows. This sequence does not need to be exact or identical each day to make sense. It only needs to carry a recognizable rhythm in which eating belongs clearly to the active portion of the day and gradually gives way to the quieter conditions of night. In earlier human settings, this rhythm would have been shaped by environment and necessity. Foraging groups responded to availability and opportunity. Early agricultural communities responded to labour cycles, daylight, and seasonal change. Even when meals varied in timing and quantity, they were still embedded within a wider structure of daylight, physical effort, and social activity. Food did not stand apart from the day. It was one of the ways the day expressed itself. This does not mean that ancient eating patterns were ideal, or that irregular access to food improved rest. Hunger and scarcity could place real pressure on the body, and it would be inaccurate to present those conditions as beneficial. The point is more careful. The body developed across long periods in which eating was connected to the larger rhythm of waking life rather than detached modern environments, that connection can become less clear. Food is widely available. It can be consumed at almost any hour, often under artificial light, often without the same level of physical movement that once surrounded it. A person can spend much of the day seated, then eat late, then move directly into sleep. From a practical standpoint, this is efficient and often necessary. But from the perspective of a body shaped in different conditions, the sequence may become harder to interpret. The body may receive signals that belong to different phases of the day at the same time. Food suggests ongoing activity and availability. Darkness suggests the approach of rest. Mental engagement may still be high, while physical movement has been low. The body must reconcile these overlapping cues without the gradual transitions that once helped organize them. This does not prevent sleep from happening. The body is capable of entering sleep under many conditions, but it may influence how fully the body settles once sleep begins. If eating remains closely tied to the late evening, the body may continue to process signals associated with activity even as it tries to shift toward rest. This is not a simple cause and effect relationship, and it would be inaccurate to claim that any particular meal timing will always lead to poor sleep. Human responses vary widely, and many factors shape how the body experiences the night. Still, it is reasonable to consider that the body may not be fully indifferent to when eating occurs. It may still be reading food as part of a larger pattern, one that was historically linked to daylight and movement. Archaeological and anthropological evidence supports the idea that human life for most of its history unfolded within environmental constraints that limited when and how food could be gathered, prepared and consumed. Even as societies became more complex, eating often remained tied to work cycles, daylight and shared routines. The modern separation of food from these broader patterns is relatively recent. The body may therefore be adapting to a form of timing that does not fully resemble the one in which it developed. When waking feels incomplete, this adaptation may be part of the background. The night has occurred, but the signals that define the end of the day may have remained blurred. The body slept, but some part of it may have continued to operate within a daytime framework longer than expected. This does not produce a dramatic disruption. It produces a subtle one. The person wakes, aware that rest has taken place, yet also aware that something did not fully settle. The tiredness that remains may not point to a single cause. It may reflect a sequence that has lost some of its clarity, where eating, light, movement, and rest no longer align as smoothly as they once did, leaving the body to pass through sleep while still carrying traces of a day that never fully came to an end. What makes food timing so quiet in its influence is that it rarely feels like part of the problem. A person can notice light, noise, stress, or discomfort more easily than the simple fact that the body may still be reading the day as unfinished because of when eating occurred. Yet the body organizes life through sequences, not isolated events. Sleep belongs to a larger order of signals, and food is one of the strongest of those signals because it tells the body that resources are available, that activity is ongoing, and that the waking phase is not entirely closed. In older human settings, this message would usually have arrived within a world that reinforced it. Food was gathered, shared, prepared, or consumed within daylight or within the fading edge of it. Even when meals varied, they were still tied to movement, work, proximity to others, and the wider structure of the environment. The body did not need to guess what phase of the day it was in. Multiple signals converged. Light, effort, temperature, hunger, eating, and later quiet all belong to the same unfolding sequence. Modern life can separate these signals from one another. A person may remain under artificial brightness long after sunset, eat at an hour that would once have belonged fully to night, and do so after a day marked by low movement but high mental effort. The body can live within this pattern, but living within it is not necessarily the same as finding it deeply familiar. If the body still interprets food as part of the active phase of life, then a meal late in the evening may extend that active phase inward, even if the conscious mind is ready to sleep. The body lies down, but the day may not feel fully over from the perspective of its deeper timing systems. This does not need to produce obvious wakefulness. The person may fall asleep and remain asleep for many hours. The difference may appear only the next morning, in the form of heaviness, dullness, or the subtle impression that the night never reached a full depth of restoration. Archaeology cannot tell us exactly how every human group timed food in relation to sleep, it would be inaccurate to imagine one universal ancestral pattern. Human diets and routines varied widely across climates, ecologies, and historical periods. Some groups likely ate later than others. Some may have had food scarcity, while others had seasonal abundance. Yet across these differences, one broader reality remains. For most of human history, food was harder to detach from natural constraints than it is now. It was linked to daylight, physical effort, seasons, storage, and social rhythms in ways that modern systems often weaken. That long history may still matter because the body carries patterns shaped not by one ideal schedule, but by repeated alignment between eating and the wider environment. When that alignment becomes less clear, the body may move into sleep carrying mixed signals. It has received darkness, but also food. It has received rest, but also cues that the active cycle is continuing. It has received the bed, but not always the deeper biological certainty that the day has truly concluded. This helps complete the larger idea of this truth. Sleep may feel incomplete not only because of what happens in the bedroom, but because the body arrives there with the timing of the day already blurred. A full night cannot entirely resolve a day whose signals did not settle into a coherent sequence before rest began. The body may do what it can, but restoration may remain partial because the entry into night was already carrying traces of unfinished daytime organization. In that sense, morning tiredness is not always the direct result of poor sleep. Sometimes it is the quiet after effect of a body trying to rest while still half reading itself as active, nourished, available, and not yet fully released from the structure of the waking day. The hours of sleep may be real, but the body may still be waiting for a cleaner ending, a more coherent closing rhythm, the kind that once emerged when food, light, movement, and darkness all belonged to the same world, and told the same story about when waking had ended and when true rest could begin. The human brain does not become empty when the body grows still. This may be one of the most important reasons why sleep can feel incomplete even after many hours have passed. Modern life often treats tiredness as though it were mostly a matter of physical depletion or insufficient sleep time, but the brain carries its own form of burden into the night. It does not only react to immediate threats or obvious effort, it also continues to sort memory, unresolved attention, language, planning, social signals, and the residue of many small impressions gathered during the day. The modern world places an unusual weight on this kind of processing. A person may spend long hours reading, deciding, evaluating, remembering, anticipating, and shifting rapidly between tasks without moving very much at all. From the outside, the day may appear quiet. Inside the brain, it may be densely crowded. This matters because sleep is not merely a period in which the mind stops. It is a period in which the brain continues to work in different ways, and the quality of that work may depend partly on what the waking day has asked it to carry. For most of human history, attention was deeply tied to immediate surroundings. Humans still had memory, planning, and social complexity, but much of daily awareness was anchored in the physical world close at hand: the land, weather, tools, fire, movement of others, available food, bodily effort, and changing light. This does not mean early human life was mentally simple. It was not, but the structure of attention may have been different. It was often directed outward into shared environments and practical actions rather than repeatedly pulled into abstract, delayed, symbolic, or highly fragmented forms of mental labour. In modern settings, the brain can remain occupied by things that are not physically present and not immediately resolvable. It can hold conversations that are over, tasks that are postponed, information that keeps arriving, and plans that extend far beyond the day itself. The body may lie down in a quiet room, but the brain may still be carrying a day that has not settled into completion. Archaeology cannot show us the exact contents of an ancient mind at the moment of sleep, and no honest account should pretend that prehistoric humans were free of mental burden. They faced uncertainty, loss, danger, and social tension of their own, but the broader setting does matter. Their attention was shaped inside direct contact with natural cycles and immediate material conditions. For most of our species' history, the brain did not live inside constant symbolic overload, continuous written or digital information, or the extended cognitive demands that now fill so much of waking life. That long background may still matter because the brain that evolved in those conditions may not fully recognize the modern day as something that can be neatly closed by bedtime. starting, a person can fall asleep while the brain is still carrying unfinished material. The effect may appear later, in the feeling that sleep happened without fully clearing what the waking day placed inside the mind. Morning then arrives with a strange mixture of rest and continuation. The body has been inactive, yet some deeper cognitive weight seems to have crossed the night intact. The person wakes not necessarily distressed, but not fully reset either. This helps frame tiredness after a full night in a new way. The issue may not only be whether the body slept enough, but whether the brain was given a day whose burdens could be organised into a shape that sleep knows how to answer. If modern life loads the mind with too many unresolved layers, too many abstractions, too many shifts of attention detached from physical completion, then sleep may become less like a full clearing and more like a partial pause. The brain continues its quiet labour through the night, but the morning may still carry remnants that feel heavy, dim, or unfinished. In that sense, the body may wake tired not because sleep failed, but because the modern brain is asked to carry a kind of day that is unusually difficult to lay down. And the older human rhythms of rest may still be trying to respond to a mental world they were never fully shaped to contain. The kind of work the modern brain performs often has no clear endpoint, and this may be one of the quiet reasons why sleep does not always feel like a full return to balance. Much of daily mental effort now involves information that cannot be resolved in a single moment. Messages continue, tasks extend across days, decisions remain open, and attention shifts rapidly from one context to another without a natural stopping place. The brain becomes accustomed to holding multiple incomplete threads at once. Even when a task is finished, another appears, and the sense of closure that might once have accompanied the end of physical work becomes less distinct. In earlier human settings, this sense of closure may have been more closely tied to the structure of the day. Activity followed the movement of light, the availability of resources, the needs of the group, and the limits imposed by environment. When the day slowed, there were often fewer ways to continue complex tasks. Darkness narrowed what could be done. Movement decreased. Social interaction changed form. The body and the brain entered a different rhythm together. And although concerns could remain, the overall structure of the day carried a clearer boundary between activity and rest. This does not mean that earlier humans lived without worry or unfinished thought. They faced uncertainty, loss, and planning of their own. But the conditions around them may have made it easier for attention to settle when the day itself settled. The brain did not have constant access to new streams of information. It did not remain engaged with distant events or abstract problems that extended indefinitely beyond the immediate environment. In modern life, the situation is different. The brain can remain engaged long after the body has stopped moving. It can revisit conversations, anticipate outcomes, process new information, and hold multiple possibilities open at once. Even in the absence of conscious worry, this continuous engagement can create a background of activity that does not fully resolve by the time the body lies down. Sleep begins, but the brain may still be carrying a day that has not reached a natural conclusion. This does not necessarily produce insomnia or obvious disturbance. A person may fall asleep and remain asleep for many hours. The difference may appear in the quality of the transition. The brain moves into sleep while still holding unresolved patterns, and those patterns may continue to be processed during the night. Sleep becomes not only rest, but also continuation. The brain works through what it has received, sorting, integrating, and adjusting. It may not fully complete that work by morning. The result can be a subtle form of tiredness that is not tied to a single thought or concern. It is more diffuse, like a sense that something remains in motion beneath the surface. Archaeological evidence cannot tell us how often prehistoric people experienced unfinished thought at night, and no careful account should claim that their minds were simple or free of complexity. Human cognition has always included memory, anticipation, social understanding, and imagination. But the scale and continuity of modern cognitive demand are different. The brain now operates in environments where information is abundant, attention is frequently divided, and closure is often delayed. This difference may matter because the brain that evolved in earlier conditions may not have been shaped for this level of continuous mental occupation without clear boundaries. When such a brain enters sleep, it may continue to work through a larger volume of unresolved material than it once did. This does not mean that the brain fails to rest. It means that rest may be combined with ongoing processing in ways that reduce the sense of completion upon waking. The body has been still, but the mind has been active in a quieter form. By morning, the hours of sleep are real, but the feeling of having fully cleared the day may be less certain. In this way, tiredness, after a full night, can be understood as a kind of overlap. The night has provided rest, but it has also carried forward some of the unfinished work of the day. The brain does what it can within that overlap, but the result may be a morning that feels only partially reset, as though sleep has softened the weight of the day without fully releasing it, leaving behind a faint sense that rest has occurred, but that the deeper quiet the body expects has not entirely arrived. What sleep may struggle to restore is not only the energy spent during the day, but the shape of a mind that no longer leaves the day behind in a clear and orderly way. In older human settings, the brain did not stop working at night, but the world around it offered stronger boundaries. Darkness reduced what could be done. Distance became harder to cross. Tasks narrowed. The land itself signaled that the active phase of life was closing. Even where concern remained, the form of the day had an ending built into it. For most of human history, human attention lived much closer to these boundaries. It was engaged with weather, movement, food, tools, fire, nearby people, and practical decisions tied to immediate surroundings. That did not make the human mind simple, and it would be false to imagine prehistoric or pre-industrial life as mentally easy. But it did mean that thought was often more firmly held inside the physical frame of the day. Modern thought can continue without that frame. It can move across distances instantly, revisit problems without action, store unfinished tasks for later, and return to them repeatedly even after the body is no longer moving. The result is a kind of mental wakefulness that may outlast visible activity by many hours. A person can finish the day externally while remaining internally open, still carrying fragments of conversation, memory, planning, evaluation, and unresolved attention. When the body lies down in this condition, sleep may begin, but the day has not truly ended in the older biological sense. The brain enters the night not empty, but full of threads that have no natural place to stop. This may be one reason morning tiredness feels so difficult to explain. The person slept. The hours were there. The body was still. Yet some deeper layer of experience seems to have continued underneath. Sleep has occurred, but the mind has not returned with the same feeling of distance from the day that the body expects from true restoration. This does not mean the brain failed to do its work at night. On the contrary, part of sleep's role is likely bound to memory, sorting and reorganization. But if the waking day delivers too much unresolved material, too much abstraction without closure, too much attention stretched across disconnected things, then the brain may spend the night not only restoring, but carrying forward the unfinished structure of waking life. In that case, the morning can feel like a softened continuation rather than a genuine beginning. Archaeology cannot open the sleeping mind of an ancient human, and no careful account should pretend to know what thoughts crossed the night thousands of years ago. But the larger comparison remains meaningful. Human cognitive life developed for most of its history under conditions where information was limited by place, time, light, and physical presence. The brain had complexity, but it lived within a world that imposed pauses. Modern life weakens those pauses. Thought can continue in brightness that ignores sunset, in tasks that ignore bodily exhaustion, in streams of information that do not respect the closing of the day. The body may sleep inside this world, but the brain may still be adapting to a form of mental occupation that has become denser, more fragmented, and less naturally bounded than the one that shaped it over long stretches of human history. This helps complete the larger idea of this trip. Feeling tired after a full night of sleep may not only reflect what happened during the night, it may reflect the fact that the brain carried too much of the day into the night for sleep to fully transform. Rest still takes place, but it is asked to do more than older patterns of human life may have required. It must restore the body, sort the mind, and absorb a quantity of unresolved experience that has no clear physical endpoint. The night can soften this burden, but it may not always dissolve it. By morning, the body rises, but some part of the mind may still be crossing the remains of the previous day. The tiredness that lingers is then not simply a sign of poor sleep, but a quiet sign that human rest now takes place under a mental load that may be historically unusual, but the deeper rhythms of the brain are still trying to recover inside a world that rarely allows thought to come fully, cleanly, and naturally to an end. Not every body experiences the night in the same way, even when the room, the bed, and the hours are similar. This difference is often explained in modern terms as individual variation, and that explanation is partly true. People differ in age, habit, health, and circumstance, but there may also be a deeper layer to this variation, one shaped by the way human lives have changed across generations. The body that tries to sleep today is not only responding to the immediate environment, it is also part of a longer chain, shaped by parents, grandparents, and many earlier conditions that influenced how human beings adapted to rest. This does not mean that sleep patterns are fixed or inherited in a simple way. Human sleep is flexible and is always adjusted to new environments, but flexibility does not erase history. It carries it forward in subtle forms, influencing how easily the body aligns with certain conditions and how it responds when those conditions change. Across the long beginning of human life, generations lived under patterns of light, movement, food, sound, and social structure that were relatively stable within each environment. The body learned to rest within those patterns, and although those patterns differed from place to place, they were grounded in direct contact with natural cycles. Over time, especially in more recent history, the pace of change has increased. Artificial light, controlled temperature, altered work patterns, new forms of social organisation, and shifts in daily movement have transformed the conditions in which sleep takes place. These changes have not affected all people in the same way or at the same speed. Some bodies may adapt more easily to the modern structure of sleep, while others may carry a stronger sense of misalignment. This variation can appear within the same household, within the same culture, even within the same schedule. One person may fall asleep quickly, wake feeling restored, and move through the day with relative ease. Another may sleep for similar hours and still feel a persistent lack of renewal. The difference is not always visible in behaviour or environment. It may lie in how each body is adjusted across its own history and its inherited background to the conditions of modern life. Archaeological and historical evidence cannot trace individual sleep experiences across generations with precision, and it would be misleading to claim a direct line from ancient environments to modern fatigue in a deterministic way. But the broader pattern of human change is clear. Over relatively short periods, especially in the last few centuries, human living conditions have shifted rapidly compared to the long timescales over which biological systems typically adapt. This creates the possibility that some aspects of the body's expectations, including those related to rest, may not be fully aligned with the environments in which they now operate. The idea is not that modern life is incompatible with human sleep, but that adaptation may be uneven. Some individuals may align more easily with artificial light, stable temperature, fixed schedules, and reduced movement. Others may experience these same conditions as slightly out of step with deeper rhythms. When tiredness appears after a full night of sleep, this uneven adaptation may be part of the explanation. The body is not simply responding to the immediate night. It is responding through a history that includes both recent habits and longer biological tendencies. This helps explain why the experience of sleep can vary so widely without a clear external cause. Two people can share the same environment and yet wake with very different sensations of restoration. The difference may not lie in what they did during the night alone, but in how their bodies interpret the night in relation to patterns carried across time. In this way, morning tiredness becomes more than a simple problem of sleep duration or quality. It becomes a reflection of how each body, shaped by its own path through changing human conditions, meets the modern night. Some bodies settle easily into it. Others remain slightly out of alignment, not in a way that produces obvious disturbance, but in a way that leaves behind a quiet sense that rest does not fully match what the body was prepared to receive, even when the hours themselves appear complete. The differences between bodies are often most visible at the edges of routine. One person can tolerate late light, irregular meals, little movement, and a narrow sleep schedule with only mild effects, while another seems to feel the cost much more quickly, even when outward habits look similar. This unevenness can be frustrating because it resists simple explanation. Modern culture often assumes that if the conditions are the same, the result should be similar. But the human body is not a standard device responding identically in every case. It is a living system shaped by development, memory, environment, and inherited tendencies that do not always line up neatly from one person to the next. Sleep is especially sensitive to this because it depends on many systems at once. Light, temperature, movement, food timing, mental load, social setting, and daily rhythm all affect rest, and bodies can differ in how strongly they respond to each of these. Over generations, human groups have lived in very different climates, day lengths, sleeping arrangements, labour patterns, and social structures. Some populations spent long stretches of history in cold environments with strong seasonal variation. Others lived nearer the equator with more stable light cycles across the year. Some lived in dense communal conditions, others in more dispersed or mobile settings. These historical differences do not produce simple fixed sleep types, and it would be dishonest to claim that any one group today sleeps in a certain way because of a direct ancestral rule. Human variation is too complex for that, but it is reasonable to say that bodies do not arrive in the present from identical historical paths. They carry histories of adaptation, both biological and cultural, that may shape how easily they align with modern patterns of rest. This becomes even more complicated when we consider recent generations. The pace of change in human environments has accelerated sharply. In only a few generations, many families have moved from outdoor or labour-intensive lives into indoor and sedentary ones, from dim evenings into bright artificial nights, from shared sleeping spaces into private rooms, from physically demanding work into mentally continuous work. These are major changes, and they have not occurred uniformly across all families, regions, or classes. Some bodies may be adapting to these conditions after multiple generations of exposure. Others may be closer to a recent transition. That does not mean one body is more advanced than another. It means adaptation can be uneven, partial, and distributed differently across human lives. Archaeology and history can show the broad movement of these changes, even if they cannot map their exact effect on individual sleep experiences. They show that the conditions of rest have changed very quickly compared with the deep timescale of human evolution. That alone makes variation understandable. If the environment changes faster than bodies can fully standardize their responses, then different people will meet the same night with different internal expectations. One body may treat modern quiet, warmth, and fixed timing as easy conditions for sleep. Another may remain slightly unconvinced by them, as if some older rhythm still expects more variation, more transition, or more physical preparation before rest can feel complete. This helps explain why waking tired can feel so personal and yet so difficult to locate. The person may do what others do and still not feel what others feel. The difference is not always a visible problem. It may be a quieter mismatch between one body's deeper rhythms and the structure of the modern night. In that sense, tiredness after a full night of sleep is not always a universal pattern experienced equally by all humans. It may be shaped by how each body stands at the meeting point between long human history and recent environmental change. The same room, the same bed, and the same number of hours may not mean the same thing to every sleeper because no two bodies arrive at the present carrying exactly the same balance and inherited tendencies, developmental experience, and adaptation to modern life. What looks like the same night from the outside may therefore be a different night inside each body. And this may be one reason some people wake restored while others wake with the quiet sense that the night, though complete by the clock, never fully reached them. When these differences are placed together, the idea of a single, correct night begins to soften. Modern life often suggests that if the environment is right and the number of hours is sufficient, then the outcome should be consistent. Yet the body may not respond to a standardized night in a standardized way. Each person carries not only a present condition, but a layered history of how their body has learned to interpret light, movement, food, sound, and rest across time. Some of that history belongs to individual experience. Some belongs to the generations that came before, not in a simple or direct line, but in the broader sense that human bodies have adapted unevenly to changing environments. This unevenness does not create clear categories. It does not divide people into fixed types. It simply means that the same conditions may not feel equally complete to everybody. For one person, a quiet, temperature-controlled room and a continuous stretch of sleep may align closely with how their body has adapted to rest. For another, those same conditions may feel subtly incomplete, not because they are uncomfortable, but because they do not fully match deeper patterns that still influence how rest is recognized. This difference is often difficult to describe because it does not produce obvious disruption. A person may fall asleep easily, remain asleep, and still wake with a sense that something in the night did not fully connect. The feeling is not sharp enough to be called a problem, but it is persistent enough to be noticed. It can lead to the impression that sleep is happening without fully reaching the body in the way it is expected to. Archaeology and history cannot give us a direct map of how these differences play out in individual lives today, and it would be inaccurate to claim that any specific pattern of modern tiredness can be traced to a particular ancestral condition. Human adaptation is complex, and it unfolds across many interacting factors, but the broader context remains important. Human beings have passed through periods of change that have altered the structure of daily life and rest more quickly than the body may fully standardize its responses. In such a situation, variation is not surprising. It is a natural result of different bodies meeting the same conditions from different points of adaptation. This helps bring the earlier ideas into a more personal frame. The feeling of waking tired after a full night of sleep may not always be a sign that something is wrong in a direct or measurable way. It may be a sign that the body is still negotiating how to align its older rhythms with newer conditions. Some bodies may find that alignment easily. Others may continue to experience a small gap, a space where sleep occurs but does not fully translate into restoration. This gap does not necessarily point to a single cause that can be removed. It may be part of a broader process in which human bodies continue to adjust to environments that have changed rapidly in recent history. Over time, that adjustment may become more complete, or it may continue to vary across individuals. What remains clear is that sleep is not only a function of the present moment, it is a meeting point between past and present, between inherited patterns and current conditions. When the two do not fully align, the result may not be visible as a clear disturbance. It may appear instead as a quiet difference in how rest is felt, a difference that shows itself in the morning as a subtle lack of renewal, even when the night itself seems sufficient. In this way, waking tired becomes less a single problem to solve and more a reflection of how each body carries its own path through human history into the modern night, sometimes finding a close fit and sometimes remaining just slightly out of place within conditions that look complete on the surface but do not always feel complete from within. The phrase "a full night of sleep" sounds precise, but the body may not understand fullness in the same way that language does. Modern life treats sleep as something that can be measured from the outside, a beginning, an ending, and a number of hours placed between them. Once those hours reach an accepted range, the night is often assumed to be complete. Yet the body may not read completion through duration alone. It may read it through pattern, through depth, through transition, through whether the night felt coherent in relation to everything that came before it. This difference matters because it helps explain why the experience of waking tired can persist even when the visible structure of sleep appears sufficient. A person may have done everything that a modern schedule recognizes as enough. The room was dark, the body lay still, the hours passed. But the morning feeling suggests that enough, in the numerical sense, did not become enough in the biological sense. For most of human history, there was no abstract unit called a full night of sleep in the modern way. There was only the lived movement from day into darkness, and from darkness back into light. Sleep belonged to that larger movement. It was not only counted, it was situated. The body rested inside changing temperature, shifting sound, communal presence, natural light transitions, physical fatigue, food timing, and the varying texture of the environment itself. Under those conditions, the night may have felt complete not because it lasted a certain number of hours, but because it unfolded within a set of signals that made biological sense from beginning to end. This does not mean that past humans always slept well, or that ancient nights were somehow ideal. They were often difficult, uncertain, and physically demanding, but it does suggest that the meaning of completion may once have depended on more than duration. The The body may still carry some trace of that older standard. Modern life simplifies the night into something that is easy to count, but sometimes harder for the body to interpret. A person can go to bed at the right hour, remain asleep, and still wake with the quiet impression that the night was flat rather than full. That impression may come from the many misalignments already explored. Light that changed too abruptly, movement that was too narrow during the day, food that arrived late, a room too detached from natural cues, a brain carrying too much unfinished thought, or a body whose deeper rhythms do not fully match the modern pattern of sleep. None of these alone needs to destroy the night, but together they help reveal why the number of hours cannot carry the whole meaning of rest. The body may be asking a different question than the clock asks. Not simply how long did the night last, but what kind of night was it? Did it guide the body gradually into rest? Did it follow a rhythm the body could recognize? Did it allow the systems shaped over long human time to move through their deeper sequence of letting go, adjusting, recovering, and returning? Archaeology cannot tell us exactly how complete a prehistoric night felt from within, and it would be dishonest to claim certainty about such private experience. But archaeology, anthropology, and history together do show that for most of human existence, sleep happens within lives structured very differently from the ones many people now live. That broader context makes it easier to question the modern assumption that sufficient sleep is always the same as restorative sleep. A full night by the standards of the schedule may still be partial by the standards of the body. This does not turn the body into a mystery. It simply places it back inside history. The feeling of morning tiredness may not be a contradiction at all. It may be the result of using a modern measure for something the body still experiences in an older, wider, and more relational way. Sleep may be long enough, and yet not complete enough, because completion for the body may depend not only on time spent asleep, but on whether the entire arc of the night still resembles the kind of human night within which restoration first learned how to feel real. The idea of enough becomes more uncertain the closer we look at how the body actually moves through the night. A fixed number of hours can describe the length of sleep, but it cannot describe how that sleep was organized, how it began, how it changed, or how it ended. Two nights can contain the same duration and still feel entirely different in the morning. One may leave the body clear and steady, while the other leaves a quiet heaviness that is difficult to explain. This suggests that completion is not a single property that can be measured from the outside. It is something the body experiences from within, shaped by the way the night unfolds across time. For most of human history, this unfolding did not follow a rigid structure. The night was not a uniform block. It carried phases that were influenced by environment, by social presence, by bodily position, by temperature, and by the natural progression of darkness itself. Sleep may have deepened and loosened in relation to these changes, not in a perfectly regular pattern, but in a way that still allowed the body to move through recognizable stages of rest. The important point is not to claim a single ancestral model, but to notice that sleep was embedded in a world that changed as the night passed. The body may therefore have learned to recognize completion not only by how long it rested, but by whether it passed through a sequence that felt complete. Modern sleep often reduces that sequence. The environment is held steady, the night is compressed into a continuous interval, and the transitions that once marked its progression become less visible. A person may fall asleep quickly, remain asleep, and wake at a chosen hour without noticing any clear change in the environment across those hours. From a practical perspective, this is efficient. From the perspective of the body, it may be less informative. The night becomes something that happens, rather than something that unfolds. This difference can influence how the body experiences the end of sleep. If the night does not carry a strong sense of progression, the morning may not feel like a clear return. The body wakes, but the transition from rest to activity may feel abrupt or incomplete. There is no gradual shift that signals that recovery has reached its conclusion. Instead, the person moves from stillness to waking life in a way that may leave part of the body feeling as though it has not fully finished what the night was meant to do. This does not mean that modern sleep is ineffective. It means that effectiveness may not be fully captured by duration alone. The body may require not only time, but also a pattern within that time, a sequence that allows different systems to engage and release in an order that feels coherent. When that pattern is reduced, can still occur, but its depth may be experienced differently. Archaeological and historical evidence cannot reconstruct the precise internal sequence of ancient sleep, and it would be inaccurate to assume that earlier nights always followed a consistent or ideal pattern. Human life was too varied for that. But the broader context suggests that sleep was rarely isolated from change. The body would have encountered shifts in light, temperature, sound, and social rhythm across the night, and these shifts may have contributed to how rest was organised and recognised. When those shifts are minimised, the body may still move through its internal cycles, but the experience of those cycles may become less distinct. This could help explain why a person can sleep for many hours and still feel as though something was missing. The night was long enough, but it may not have been structured in a way that the body fully interprets as complete. The difference is subtle, but it accumulates. Over time, the idea of enough becomes less reliable. The clock says one thing, while the body feels another. In that space, tiredness persists. Not as a clear sign of failure, but as a quiet indication that rest is not only about how much time has passed, but about how that time was lived by the body, and whether the night offered a sequence of experience that still resembles the deeper patterns through which human rest once learned how to reach its full sense of completion. What the body may be missing, then, is not merely more sleep, but a stronger sense that the night has truly become whole. Modern life is very good at giving sleep a visible structure. It gives a bedtime, a wake time, a room prepared for rest, and a number that can be counted in the morning. These things create the impression of completeness because they make the night legible to the clock. Yet the body may still be asking for something the clock cannot measure. It may be asking whether the night carried enough transition, enough environmental meaning, enough alignment with the shape of human rest as it developed across long stretches of time. If the answer is only partly yes, then the result may be a night that looks full from the outside while remaining unfinished from within. This helps explain why the feeling of tiredness can survive even when the visible conditions appear correct. The body may not be rejecting sleep. It may be registering that sleep, though present, did not unfold with the kind of coherence that allows restoration to feel complete. Across most of human history, the night was not a neutral container filled only with unconscious hours. It was a lived passage from one state of existence into another. Evening dimmed gradually. Sound changed. Temperature shifted. Activity narrowed. Bodies settled in relation to one another and to the surrounding environment. Sleep emerged inside that movement. It did not begin at a single fixed point, and it did not simply last until a chosen hour. It thickened, loosened, varied, and eventually gave way to morning as part of a wider process. The body that evolved in those conditions may still recognize completion through process rather than duration alone. The night may need to feel like it traveled somewhere. In order for recovery to feel convincing, modern sleep often interrupts that feeling. The night begins abruptly after artificial brightness, unfolds in a controlled environment with reduced variation, and may end just as abruptly with an alarm, a light, or a demand to rise at once into activity. From one perspective, this arrangement is practical and efficient. From another, it may be too flat for the body to fully trust as a complete passage through rest. The hours are there, but the sense of movement through the night may be weak. The body sleeps, but may not fully experience the deeper sequence by which fatigue becomes restoration and restoration becomes readiness. This is why the phrase, "a full night," can be quietly misleading. It suggests that fullness is something already guaranteed by length. But the body may understand fullness as a relationship between time and form. A night can be long and still feel thin. It can contain sleep and still not carry enough of the older rhythm that once framed human recovery. Archaeology cannot tell us what fullness felt like to any one sleeper in prehistory, and no honest account should claim certainty about such intimate experience. But the wider historical pattern is enough to support a careful conclusion. Human rest developed in environments where nights were textured, gradual, shared, and closely tied to natural change. Modern nights are often more controlled, more private, and more sharply divided from the day that precedes them. The body may adapt to these conditions, but adaptation does not necessarily erase older expectations. Some part of the organism may still be waiting for a fuller sense of night than the modern schedule provides. If so, then waking tired after many hours is not simply a contradiction to be solved by counting more carefully. carefully. It may be a sign that the body measures restoration through a richer standard than duration alone. It may be listening for whether the night had shape, whether it arrived properly, whether it changed in ways that felt real, and whether it offered enough of the old human pattern for rest to feel complete. When that pattern is missing, even partly, the body may rise with a quiet impression that it slept through the hours without ever fully reaching the depth those hours were meant to contain. Perhaps the deepest reason morning tiredness feels so unsettling is that it suggests the body is waiting for something the modern night no longer knows how to provide. Not a dramatic cure, not a lost secret, but a different kind of darkness, a different way of arriving at rest, a different relationship between the sleeping body and the world around it. Across everything we have traced, the pattern has remained quiet but consistent. The body did not first learn to sleep in a sealed stillness. It learned to sleep in changing air, in gradual dusk, in shared presence, in nights textured by sound, temperature, movement, and the lingering nearness of the world. It learned to rest after days shaped by varied motion, by physical effort, by natural light, by food tied more closely to environment and activity. It learned to sleep with a brain that worked within stronger boundaries, where darkness slowed the day and where the world itself helped declare that waking had ended. The modern night has changed many of these conditions. It offers comfort, protection, privacy, and control, all of which can support rest in real and important ways. But it also asks the body to sleep in a form of night that is historically unusual, bright until suddenly dark, still until suddenly awake, physically soft but often firmly flat, mentally crowded but externally quiet, long by the clock yet sometimes thin in transition. The body can adapt to this night, and clearly it does, but adaptation is not always the same as full belonging. A person may lie down in perfect safety and still carry a faint sense that the body has not entered the kind of night it was prepared to recognize most deeply. This possibility does not mean the body is malfunctioning. It may mean the body is remembering, in its own slow biological way, that rest was once part of a larger conversation between organism and environment. Sleep was not a private technical event. It was a passage through a living world. When that world becomes too reduced, too sudden, too detached from older rhythms, the body may still sleep while remaining quietly unconvinced that recovery has fully happened. This helps bring the question back to its proper scale. Why does your body feel tired even after a full night of sleep? Perhaps because a full night, in the modern sense, is not always the same thing as a complete night in the older sense the body still carries. The hours may be there, but the sequence may be incomplete. Darkness may arrive, but not gradually enough. Stillness may exist, but without enough of the physical and environmental texture that once helped frame rest. The mind may sleep, but not after a day that ended clearly. The body may lie down, but not after a pattern of movement and light that it still knows how to answer most fully. Morning tiredness, then, may be less a single defect than a quiet sign of historical mismatch, a small but persistent reminder that the human organism still belongs partly to conditions that no longer surround it. And yet there is something gently valuable in that thought. It means the body is not simply weak, lazy, or broken when rest feels incomplete. It means the body is old in a world that has changed quickly. It means some of its expectations were shaped over spans of time much longer than modern life usually allows us to notice. To see tiredness in this way is not to solve it completely, and it is not to turn it into mystery. It is simply to return the feeling to its real context. The body is not separate from history. It carries history into every morning, and sometimes the heaviness that remains after sleep may be nothing more and nothing less than the trace of a very old creature trying to rest inside a night that is comfortable, efficient, and well-built, but still not quite the night it was made to understand. If the body is waiting, it may not be waiting for perfection. It may be waiting for coherence. That is a quieter and more human idea. Across the long path behind us, human beings did not sleep in ideal conditions. Nights could be cold, uncertain, interrupted, physically demanding and shaped by realities that modern life has mercifully softened. No careful view of history should pretend otherwise. But even within that difficulty, there was often a kind of coherence that modern rest sometimes lacks. Light changed with the sky. Activity narrowed with darkness. Food, movement, temperature, and social life were tied more closely to one another. The day had a shape that the body could read, and the night followed from that shape. Sleep emerged inside a sequence that was imperfect, but legible. The body may still be looking for that legibility now. This helps explain why the feeling of incomplete rest can be so strangely calm. It is not always dramatic enough to feel like crisis. It often arrives as a quiet dullness, a softness without renewal, a sense that the night passed but did not fully gather the body back together. That kind of tiredness can be difficult to respect because it lacks sharpness. It does not always announce itself as illness, alarm, or obvious deprivation. Yet its persistence gives it meaning. It suggests that the body is still making distinctions deeper than comfort and duration. It may be noticing whether the whole arc of the day and night formed something intelligible, something that resembles the broader human pattern within which restoration first learned how to occur. In modern life, that arc is often broken into pieces. Light extends beyond sunset. Food arrives after the active part of the day should be fading. Movement is narrow. The brain remains occupied by unfinished abstractions. The night begins abruptly and ends abruptly. Each part of this can be managed, justified, and normalized. But the body may still register the fragmentation. It may still sense that the signals of life are no longer moving together. Sleep then becomes an attempt to restore coherence after a day that did not fully possess it. Sometimes that attempt is enough. Sometimes it is only partial. This does not mean that the answer to morning tiredness lies in rebuilding the past. Human history is not a prescription, and the older human world included many forms of hardship that no one should romanticize. The value of looking backward is not to imitate ancient life literally. It is to understand the scale of the body's inheritance. The body is not confused because it is weak. It is often responding faithfully to patterns shaped under conditions very different from the ones now surrounding it. That perspective changes the emotional meaning of tiredness. It removes some of the self-blame that modern life easily produces. If the body wakes heavy after what should have been enough sleep, the first conclusion does not need to be that it has failed. It may be that the body is still trying to translate an older design into a newer world, still trying to find wholeness in nights that are comfortable yet historically unusual. There is something gently educational in that realization. It teaches that rest is not merely a private technical task measured in hours and completed in isolation. It is a relationship between organism and environment, between day and night, between what the body has been shaped by and what it is now being asked to live inside. To understand that relationship is already a form of care, even before any practical change is imagined. It places the human body back into the long story it came from. And perhaps that is one of the most useful things this question can offer. Not a perfect solution, and not a final answer, but a calmer way to see the tired body in the morning. Not as a machine that disobeyed instructions, but as a historical body, carrying an ancient rhythm through a modern night, still searching for enough continuity to believe, fully and without hesitation, that rest has truly taken place. What remains, after all of this, is not a verdict against the modern world, and not a longing for some imagined past where human rest was simple, pure, or complete. The past was never that gentle. Human beings slept under pressure from weather, uncertainty, injury, noise, cold, hunger, and the constant limits of the material world. It would be false to turn that history into comfort, but it would also be false to imagine that the body has left that history behind. The body still carries it, quietly, in the way it responds to light, movement, sound, temperature, timing, mental burden, and the many small transitions that lead from waking into sleep. That is perhaps the most useful truth this question can offer. When your body feels tired even after a full night of sleep, the feeling may not always be a simple mistake, waiting to be corrected by counting more carefully. It may be the trace of a deeper mismatch between the kind of night the body once learned to recognize and the kind of night it is now asked to live inside. A Across this long path, one pattern has returned again and again. Human rest was shaped in relation to a world that changed gradually. Evening darkened in stages, air cooled, bodies settled together. Days involved wider movement, more contact with terrain, and a clearer relation between effort and fatigue. Food, light, and rest were more tightly tied to one another. Thought was bounded more often by the material limits of the day. Sleep emerged inside that larger coherence. It was not perfect, but it was legible. The body could read it. Modern life, for all its comfort and protection, often weakens that legibility. It gives the body safety, but also sudden transitions. It gives the body softness, but also sensory flatness. It gives the brain endless extension beyond sunset. It gives sleep enough hours, yet not always enough of the older signals that once helped the body feel that the day had fully ended and that the night had fully become real. This is why the feeling of waking tired deserves to be understood with patience. Not every tired morning has the same cause. Not every body meets the same night in the same way. Human variation is real, and no single explanation can account for every experience. But the larger historical frame still matters. It reminds us that the body is not separate from human origins. It is not an isolated modern object that should automatically function according to modern schedules simply because those schedules are efficient. The body is older than the room it sleeps in, older than the light it sleeps under, older than the habits that now shape the evening. To remember this is not to reject modern life. It is to see the body more honestly, as something living at the meeting point between ancient rhythms and recent conditions. There is value in that honesty because it changes the meaning of tiredness. It turns a private frustration into a human question. It softens the reflex to assume failure. It makes room for a quieter interpretation, one in which the body is not disobedient, but historically burdened, still adapting, still translating old patterns into a world that changed faster than deep biology usually does. And perhaps that is the final educational value hidden inside this gentle problem. The body teaches history, even in the morning. It teaches that human beings do not simply live in history through tools, ruins, migrations, or written records. We live in history through rhythm, through sleep, through the strange persistence of old expectations inside ordinary feelings we thought were only our own. The heaviness after sleep may be one of those feelings. Not a mystery to romanticize, not a flaw to condemn, but a sign that the human body still remembers more than modern life usually asks it to explain. So the question does not close by asking whether sleep is broken, or whether the past held a perfect answer. It closes more quietly than that, with the recognition that a modern night can be safe, comfortable, and long, and still leave the body searching for a deeper sense of arrival. And if that is true, then perhaps the most human question is still the simplest one. When the body wakes tired, after what should have been enough, is it asking for more sleep, or for a kind of night the modern world no longer knows how to give?